Why are you podcasting? Are you podcasting to make money? Okay, then you need to do this. Are you podcasting because you love it? Then here's what you should do. And I think the highest comment I received from anybody about podcasting for dummies is that they said, the book is thorough. If you've got a question, you'll find the answer in there.
Hi, and welcome to the Innovative Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Isolde Trachtenberg. On the show, you'll get my conversations with peak-performing thought leaders, creatives, and entrepreneurs. Every week, I bring you the latest scoop on what these incredible people do to succeed and how you can get their secrets and do it too. And hey, do you want to become a member of the Innovative Virtuoso Club? Our virtuosos get all sorts of exclusive content like bonus episodes just for you and videos to boost creative adrenaline and problem-solving juice. Go to isoldet.com/virtuoso to learn more. And now, let's get on with the show. Hello, and welcome to the Innovative Mindset Podcast. My name is Isolde Trachtenberg, and I am so thrilled that you're here. And I'm super thrilled to have back today's guest. He was just on the show just a couple of months ago, but we talked, we figured out just now, we talked for almost 4 hours, and we still have so much more to cover. I want to tell you a little bit about Tee Morris and why he's on the show again so soon. Tee Morris has been writing science fiction, fantasy, horror, nonfiction for well over a decade. His first novel, Moravia, The Chronicles of Rafe and Ascana, became the first novel to be podcast in its entirety. An important little note for why Tee is back today. It ushered in a new age for authors, podcasting. He went on with Evo Terra to write Podcasting for Dummies, another little hint of why Rafe. I called you Rafe, Tee, because I remember you as Rafe from the Renaissance Festival.
I hear you.
As well as the following editions alongside Chuck Tomasi. In 2011, Tee returned to fiction with the Ministry of Peculiar Occurrences series, penned with his wife, Pip Ballantyne, who is fabulous. They're both fabulous. You know this. And somewhere in the middle of all this, Tee and Pip have released the second edition of Social Media for Writers. And it's not only been updated for new platforms that are available today, but they also delve deeply into crisis management for writers, which is a big thing. All of us need to know a little bit more about crisis management. Tee and Pip also host The Shared Desk, and it's a podcast covering collaboration and other aspects of a writer's lifestyle, which you should be listening to regularly. And Tee enjoys a writer's life in Virginia alongside Pip, his daughter, and their 3 cats. Explore the works of Tee Morris and his occasional geek rants at teemorris.com. That's TEEMORRIS.com. And I'm thrilled to welcome you to the show, Tee. Thank you so much for being here.
Hard to believe that it didn't feel like 4 hours. And even listening to it, it just flew by. It just flew by.
I know.
And as I was listening, as I was listening, I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't want to cut any of this. This is a ball. I mean,
yeah. Yeah. And you know, it's funny
fun.
because people talk to me about that, and they were like, you're going to put out a almost 4-hour episode. And I'm like, there is no chaff. There is no chaff in this. It was all wheat. So, why would I cut the gold? There's no reason to do that.
The thing is, you are in a very, very exclusive club. I got to tell you, Isolde, you're in a very exclusive club, because there was another interview that I did that also went like around that time. And it was a podcast called Backseat Producers, and for their 100th show, they challenged me to review 100 movies in 100 minutes.
Wow!
And I wound up doing 200 movies in about that time. I hit the 100 mark way before 100, and they said, just keep going, Tee. And I reviewed everything as far back as Metropolis, all the way up to whatever was at the theaters at that time. Remember when we went to movie theaters? And it was stuff like that. And it was a riot. I have never had more fun trying to do, because that was a real challenge, to review 100 movies in 100 minutes. And it was a ball. It was a ball. So you're in very fine company, as always.
I'm honored. This is great. And it's amazing to me, this idea of quick thinking. And you have one of the most facile minds I've ever come across. So I'm so grateful for getting that aspect of you sort of in my sphere, if you will. And this idea of thinking that quickly and figuring out the heart of the matter so easily and being able to then turn around and boom, give the information back in a way that's palatable and interesting is amazing to me. I love it.
You have to, well, you have to stay on your toes with podcasting. I think that was my first lesson, was you really become aware of your surroundings. Really become aware. It's very much like acting. And that's what I think I enjoy so much about podcasting. Why I've been doing it for 15 years is, it's very much like acting. You have to pay attention to your surroundings. You got to pay attention to not only what you're saying, but also what the person you're talking with is saying to you or asking you. And the more you focus on listening, as opposed to listening to yourself, but just listening in general, I think the better of a podcaster you become.
I completely agree. It's this idea of active listening, being present in the moment to whatever's going on so that you can take it in and also respond in a way that's substantive. And you mentioned podcasting right away, and I want to sort of have the band playing when I say congratulations on the new edition of Podcasting for Dummies.
I'm still stunned that we're at our 4th edition. I really am, because I honestly thought after the 2nd edition, the folks at Wiley were like, yeah, we're good. And that's what they had said, almost coming up on almost 10 years ago. We did the 1st edition in 2005, and then the 2nd edition came out just around 2007. And about a year passed, and I said, would you guys be interested in an update? Because a lot has changed. And they're like, no, we're good. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I left it alone. And then fast forward to 2016, I think it was, and I got my 3rd royalty check in a year's time. And the royalty checks were going up. And on top of all that, I'm like, this book is nearly a decade old. That's ancient in tech terms.
Sure.
I mean, to kind of give it perspective, I was talking about, I think I did mention the iRiver.
Wow.
Which was one of the original portable recorders they had in 2005. And we mentioned the iRiver in 2000, and I think we mentioned it in 2007. I can't recall, but yeah, I remember there was stuff that stuff wasn't even being made anymore, but people were still buying the book. And that's when I reached out to my chief editor, a guy by the name of Steve Hayes, who I hadn't talked to in a long time. And I said, Steve, this is T. Morris. And he just kind of paused and he was like, funny, we were just talking about you today. And and that was when he told me that the folks at Wiley noticed, hey, this old book is getting is getting like a 2nd or 3rd wind. Maybe we should think about, I don't know, making a 3rd edition. And the way I describe it to people is that the 1st edition was raw and brand new. The 2nd one was a nip tuck. It was, just a little tightening, a little tweak here, a little tweak there. The 3rd edition was just gutting the house, because it had good bones, but we had to completely gut the house and rebuild it from the ground up. And the 4th edition I described to people as the next evolution in this book. And what I mean by the next evolution is that we basically, we being Chuck and myself, we double down and we say, look, there are a lot of people on services like Facebook Live and Twitch and YouTube that are all using the term podcasting. And here's the truth of it. This is what it has evolved into, and you can't ignore it anymore. You've got to start actively becoming a part of that platform. Yeah, but Chuck and I took a step back from the 4th edition, which we've seen improves, and we just said, this is fantastic. We are really happy with the state of the book and we look at where we started and how we got there. It's just like, and how we got to the 4th edition. We're just like, how did we get here? How did we get here? And it's just, it's been a heck of a ride.
So how did you get here?
That's a good question. Oh boy, was that a good question. It all started with pirates crashing my book launch.
Of course it did.
Of course it did. Because Moravia, as you mentioned, Moravia started in 2002. and I had pirates. The name of the group at the time. They were the they were a group of they were the Sterling sword players, if I remember correctly. But they were an offshoot of the Sterling Playmakers and Noble Blades. Thank you. That's what it was. The Noble Blades. That's who we were. And I pitched them the idea of being pirates crashing my book launch. They loved the idea, so we did this wild evening of sword fight and choreography and stuff like that. That all happened as pirates crashed my first book signing, and it was a blast. And people talked about it for years afterwards. Then I had the sequel to Moravia come out, or getting ready to come out, and my publisher said, "So what are you going to do to top that?" And I was like, well, I had an idea where I would contact Evo Terra and his then podcasting partner, Michael R. Meningay, and they had a variety show for science fiction authors called Dragon Page Cover to Cover. And they would have interviews, they would have in-studio guests, all different types of things about the craft of writing. It was science fiction, fantasy, and horror. And I approached them and I said, how would you guys feel about me sending you a chapter a week and you put that in your feed, and we go on ahead and we just podcast a novel from beginning to end? No one had ever done that before. And we started doing it, and immediately there was a response. The listeners just said, yes. And where do we find more? And a couple of the authors stepped forward and said, we'd like to do this off of your show too. And in the middle of all that, my agent reached out to me and said, hey, T, do you know anything about this new trend called podcasting? And I said, I know a thing or two about it. And she said, well, we'd love to, I'd love for you to get a pitch for this book. And I said, okay. So I got Evo involved because Evo knew more about the technical aspect of it than I did. And as we put the proposal together, sent it to the agent, she said, now you got to do it again. So we did it again. Now you got to do it again. We did it again. We've been at this for about a week. And she said, you need to follow the template that I sent you. And I said, what template? And she said, oh, I forgot to send you the template. Hold on. She sends the template for the outline. I open it up, and at the top, that's when I see John Wiley and Sons for Dummies.
Wow.
That's how I found out it was for Dummies book. And I'm reading this, and the phone rings. I didn't even have to look. I picked up the phone. I hit accept, and I went, no, Evo, I didn't know it was for Dummies people. And that night we did a 24-hour turnaround, sent it, and that was how that was how the relationship started with the Dummies people.
Wow. And umpteen books later, you're here
at
the 4th edition.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, and when I think about it, within 2 years' time, I've written Twitch for Dummies, I've written Discord for Dummies, and I've got the 4th edition of Podcasting for Dummies, which tells me that if you have any questions about content creation, I'm your guy. And
completely.
Yeah. And it has been a fantastic relationship with the Wiley Publishing, for Dummies people. Now, as an author myself, I've had a weird relationship with being a For Dummies author. It's got nothing to do with Wiley. They're awesome. There's a reason I've been working with Steve for 15 years. And it took us long enough, but I finally met him at Gen Con last year, and we just hung out, and it was a great day. It was a really good day. But with being a Dummies author, I got a weird reception from speaking events and from people that were doing seminars and things like that. I actually did a blog post about it called Embracing the Dummy in Me. And this was after I just signed off on Discord for Dummies. And I told some of the stories of how people reacted when I would pitch to them at their different events. I'm a Dummies author. And they would just come out and say, we're not interested. We don't want people to think they're dummies at our event. And I was like, I'm sorry. And it was just that sort of snide remark to the Dummies books. and to being branded as a dummies author. But here's the truth of it. And it took me a while to figure this out, but here's the truth of it. When it comes to how-to books, no books are referenced more than the For Dummies books.
Mm-hmm.
The people that write for the Dummies books are computer analysts. They're physicists. They are influential members of their community, of their society, of whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
There have been Pulitzer winners. There have been Nobel nominees. There are a lot of people involved in the Dummies in the Dummies oeuvre, and they're the number one seller of how-to
Mm-hmm.
books.
Mm-hmm.
And let's be honest, no one's going to admit that they bought a Dummies book if they had questions, but if they were looking to figure out how to do something, the first thing they're going to look up is whatever I need to know for Dummies.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason why Wiley Publishing has been so successful with this, and it has been. I remember at one time there was a series called The Complete Idiot's Guide.
Mm-hmm.
There were all these different type of For Dummies knockoffs. Dummies is the brand that is still standing, and that says a lot about the integrity of that series. And when I finally, it took me a long time, but when I finally came around to that, I was just like, no, I'm pretty proud being a Dummies author. I'm pretty proud of it. And if somebody wants to turn down the a 3-time published Dummies author for the number one seller of how-to books because they're afraid of some bad juju, people turned down the Beatles and people rejected J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter books. So you know what? It's okay. I'm in good company. I'm in good company.
It's amazing to listen to you. It's a weird insecurity, it sounds like, that people have about not wanting to be associated with Dummies. To me, it's an ignorant. It's kind of it feels like it's born out of ignorance almost. I love learning new things, and so being ignorant about something and going, I need the basics. I need the breakdown of how to do this. And that's one of the things, it's funny, before we started recording, we were talking about formatting and things like that. And you even mentioned, this idea of what is this? And, this is the For Dummies book. And that it's going to be laid out in a way that makes intuitive sense, not just practical sense. And that is something that I really love about the For Dummies brand, is that I can tell what I'm going to need pretty quickly, and I can navigate it really easily. And so when you were creating it, how much of that is your own intuitive process, and how much of that is them having a sort of a pre-formatted thing that you can follow and flow with?
Well, when you're writing any of these books, any of these kinds of books, whether it's a For Dummies book like what I did with Wiley, or even Social Media for Writers, there's no real set outline. There's really no set template. Maybe with the Dummies people, yes, there is, because you do have, you're like, okay, there are some conventions that are in all Dummies books that we use here. There are the parts of, there's part 1, there's part 1, 2, 3, 4, et cetera, and they should all be grouped. These are the chapters that are grouped together to explain, okay, these are the things that we are currently working on, and all these chapters specifically deal with that. Like there's one part in Podcasting for Dummies called Podsibilities for your show.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in there, we talk about, in the 4th edition, we talk about things like building your community, getting sponsorship. And we're a little more, we try to be a little more forward thinking with getting sponsorship as opposed to using monetization. Because I hate that word.
I agree.
But I talk about sponsorship. We also talk about, podcasting for profit, podcasting for passion. And then that's when we actually bring in the chapter on streaming as a podsibility, because from there, what happens is you're podcasting, but you're podcasting with a live audience.
Mm-hmm.
which is an entire game changer for podcasting. This is something that they talked about doing back in 2005, and they just couldn't quite get it right in between the first and second edition. By the third edition, live audiences was like, it was a nice idea, but no one really bought into it. But with Twitch and with the way streaming has evolved, now you can do podcasting with a live audience, and that's one of the conventions that you use. The other convention that you need to use in a dummies book is you have warnings, you have tips, you have technical stuff, the shout outs, the little call outs that you get throughout the book. But when it comes to actual structure of the book, that is left up to the authors.
Mm-hmm.
So with Chuck Tomasi, who has also been podcasting since 2015, since 2005. In fact, I think Technorama started in 2004. But Chuck has been podcasting just as long, if not longer, than me. And we started first by going, okay, here's what a podcast is. Here's how it's defined. Here's where you can find podcasts. Here's how you subscribe to a podcast. So we the first two chapters are pretty much, we are looking at this from a listener's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
If I wanted to know what a podcast is and how to listen to it, then I'm going to go to the book. Then we get to the third chapter, which is, okay, we're going to make a podcast. So where do we start? Okay, well, you might want to look at microphones first, because that's where everybody starts. Then you want to look at headphones. Then you want to look at software. Then you're going to look at some other hardware. And we build it so that by the time you reach the middle of the book, we're getting into things like, you don't have a problem with this is all, but interview tactics. You get to, we have an entire section, an entire chapter just about interviews, about what's a good question, what's a bad question, when are you a good interviewer, when are you a bad interviewer, and it really, by that time though, you should have the basics of your studio together, and then we get into the nitty gritty part of, here's how you refine your show, here's how you find your voice, and then the latter chapters are all things like, why are you? It gets into what I call the philosophy of podcasting. Why are you podcasting? Are you podcasting to make money? Okay, then you need to do this. Are you podcasting because you love it? Then here's what you should do. And then we end the entire thing with, these are podcasters who are still podcasting this day, and this is what we've learned from them. And so yeah, we try to encompass as much as we can without it feeling overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And I think the highest comment I received from anybody about podcasting for dummies is that they said the book is thorough. If you've got a question, you'll find the answer in there. And the best thing is that the person went on to say, if you've got a question, the best part is that these authors have made themselves accessible. So find them on Twitter, find them on their podcast, just reach out. And I've had people do that. And 9 times out of 10, when they ask me a question, I go, oh, that's in this page. And they're like, oh, I skipped that chapter. Darn it. and so, I'm not saying you have to read the book from cover to cover, but what I'm saying is that we try to be as thorough as possible in podcasting for dummies, so that it is your one-stop shop.
And the third edition is in many ways the one-stop shop, but there's so much more in just these last 4 years. I mean, I've watched the numbers of podcasts just skyrocket. Yeah.
It's amazing.
It blows me away. And the thing is, one of the things that's fascinating to me, and this is something I'd love for you to talk about, is this idea of being able to podcast, or listen to a podcast, I should say, while you're doing other things. You can be washing the dishes, you can be riding your bike. What about the platform? What about the format of podcasting lends itself so well to that sort of multitasking way of living that so many of us do nowadays?
Because it's media on demand, and a majority of it, and I do stress that, a majority of podcasts are audio. and that was one of the big distinctions we made between the third and the fourth edition.
Mm-hmm.
And the third edition was the last one where we talked about video podcasting as an option.
Mm-hmm.
And when we got to the fourth edition, Chuck and I both agreed, you know what? We should stop talking about video podcasting as a viable option for a number of reasons. And what we did was that we basically laid out those number of reasons. People can still go on ahead and do it. But I think the biggest setback for video podcasting, apart from the stuff that we outlined in the book, was when Spotify stepped in.
Mm.
And Spotify said very clearly, yeah, we will carry your podcast. We will gladly give you the bandwidth and you can stream it, but it's got to be audio only, which makes sense because, Spotify isn't built for video.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happened, I said that is a serious blow to video podcasting. But that's why we went into streaming. And like I said, the streaming chapter to me is the best of both worlds. It's where we talk about the downside of video podcasting, but the solution then in that respect is streaming. But what I have seen with the evolution of podcasting is not just making it it's not only an easily consumable thing. It was a lot easier to consume, especially when you had long commutes to work. Of course, now that's changed. That's changed in our current COVID situation, but we're not going to stay in this forever. Eventually the commutes will come back. And then of course you'll see even more people consuming podcasts then, but people are still consuming them because they're easier to consume. It's audio. It's somebody or some people talking to you in that fireside chat sort of way. It makes the experts very accessible. And I think that is one of the big things about podcasting and perhaps one of its strongest attributes is that it's I remember somebody described the Shared Desk, which is the writing podcast that my wife and I do together. They described it as it's like sitting down and having a beer with T and Pip. And it makes it that much easier to just wrap your brain around these high concepts in writing, in publishing, in literature. And that's where I think the magic of the accessibility happens is the fact that it's audio and that it has become so much easier to consume and to subscribe to said media, which brings me to something I feel like I want to share with you is that you've been talking about how I got involved in this, and what I think has been amazing over these 15 years of podcasting is how I've watched podcasting evolve into it. There were 3 stages of the podcast. The first one was when it started. And it was just geeks in the basement of the science building doing something weird. That's the way it was regarded. Mm-hmm. Then you fast forward to between the second and third edition, and it was a punchline. In every show I saw, it was a punchline. It was podcasting was where people in broadcasting went when they either washed out, burned out, or couldn't cut it. Mm-hmm. And that was the punchline. I remember one punchline in particular was in the newsroom, when Jane Fonda says to Sam Waterston, "You better put Will on a short lease, otherwise he's going to find himself hosting his own podcast." So that was the attitude. Now we get to today. And today, Jordan Peele reimagined Nightmare at 20,000 feet. And the catalyst for everything that went wrong was a podcast. And the podcast was specifically done in the style of Lore by Aaron Menke, Menke's Lore. And now you're seeing podcasts showing up as docuseries on Amazon Prime and Netflix. Mm-hmm. To me, that's the evolution of podcasting. And I, for one, am so happy to see it mainstream. I am so happy to see this thing that we started back in 2005, we being Adam Curry, Dave Weiner, all these original podcasters. And a lot of us are still doing it today because that's where our heart is. Our heart's still there.
And you can have, because it's long form, this idea of being able to get into the nitty and the gritty
Mhm.
of whatever subject you're passionate about. That's in part why people do it. I mean, you have people like Tim Ferriss who have millions of downloads every month,
Right.
and he gets to do what he's passionate about. He gets to talk to who he's passionate about talking to. But
Right.
then there's also people like Dax Shepard with The Armchair Expert and Justin Long and various other people who are sort of celebrities in a way, who are
Yeah.
going, you know what, this is something I want to do. And I keep seeing new ones pop up. And it's, honestly, Tia, this is a little bit like why I moved to New York. I moved to New York City. No, no, seriously, because anything you are interested in, you can find somebody doing it in New York City. Anything.
I believe that. Oh yeah. 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 Yeah.
And I feel like the same thing is with podcasting. Anything that you might be interested in, someone is doing a podcast about it, and you can be part of that
Yes.
community.
That is very true. Um, when I was teaching classes on how to podcast in 2007, which was absolutely novel. I mean, in fact, I think the first time I gave a presentation on it was in 2006. And this is when I was a full-time consultant, and I pitched it to my boss. My boss was like, "Yeah, okay." And he knew, and of course, but he asked the question, "Well, wait a minute, T, don't you need an iPod to listen to podcasts?" And I'm here to say it was such a happy day for me and Chuck when we got to remove that statement out of Podcasting for Dummies. The fourth edition will be the first edition of Podcasting for Dummies that has no reference to the iPod or you need an iPod to listen to this. So I'm very proud of that.
Yay.
But yeah, it was in 2006, and he prepared me. He said, "Just T, when you do these presentations, I just want you to know, um, these are free seminars where we say, hey, this is what we do here, this is the thing we teach, and this is a deep dive into the subject matter. You can expect maybe 5 or 10 people. They'll get a cup of coffee, they'll have a free seminar for 2 hours, and then they leave." I'm like, okay, no sweat. It was standing room only.
Mm.
We crammed 50 people into a room that had a capacity of 35. And my boss was beside himself because this is what they used to advertise their classes. And that day I said, we're going to be teaching classes here in podcasting. And we actually had, I remember the demand for this class was so intense that um, that they actually had to turn somebody away who was driving to our facility to say, "I am on my way. Do you have any open slots?"
Hmm.
And this was in 2006.
Wow.
Um, and I bring this up to say that this was how hungry people were to know about podcasting, either from a business perspective or even from a personal perspective. One of my students actually started up a Rudolph Valentino podcast.
Wow.
And that you can't get any more niche than that. And I remember when she wrote to me one day and said, "Hey T, I got my 200th listener."
Yay.
And I'm like, if you would have told me that 200 people would have subscribed to a podcast specific to Rudolph Valentino, I would have said that's going to be a stretch. But she did it. And that's the thing. It's that yes, you can literally do a podcast on anything you want. And there's pros and cons to that. The pro of that is that, yeah, you can find your community, you can find your tribe, you can find the people that you connect with, but it's going to be such a niche fit that maybe you're not going to get the massive numbers that you'd like to see. Like, you're not going to get the Joe Rogan experience or, the Michelle Obama podcast or stuff like that. But then on the other side of the spectrum, if you want to do politics, or if you want to do sports, or if you want to do video games, yeah, you could do that. Sure. It does not guarantee, though, that you are going to get the massive numbers either, because it's always going to come back to, well, what's different about your podcast versus the other podcasts that are out there. And that's when I tell people, if you get into this for numbers, for the fame, for the fortune, for the big contracts from sponsors, I got some bad news for you. You're not in it for the right reasons. If you want to do a podcast because, quote unquote, it's cool, again, that's not the right reason. You got to find something you are passionate about. because the thing I will say that is consistent between all podcasts is when you hear a podcast with someone that's excited, that's genuinely excited to be there, versus the podcast where they're trying to phone that in, you're going to pick up on that straight away within the first 5 minutes. So it's when you find that passion, that's when you know you're ready to podcast.
Yeah, the voice doesn't lie. You can tell. You can tell when someone's like, "Oh, here we are."
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Just to reference our past interview, that was over 3.5 hours, and not once did we ever sound bored. We were just like, wait a minute. We really should probably wrap this up just for courtesy's sake, because man, we got stuff to do today, but I could keep going, and that's why I'm back.
And it was great because I kept saying things like, "Oh, we're gonna, yeah, I know you," and no, we didn't stop, and I kept because I kept. Yeah, and yet we had more. I had more questions. You had more answers, and
we had plenty in the tank.
Yeah,
we had plenty in the tank.
Absolutely, that could have been a 7-hour episode.
And that would have set a new record.
Yeah, you know, what did you do yesterday? Oh, I listened to T. Morris on Izolda's podcast all day. Yeah, 24 hours. It was.
We'll do that for charity. We'll do a 24-hour interview for charity. How about?
Yes, I would love it. That'd be great. Okay, so let me bring it back down to earth.
Okay.
Let's talk about this idea that you were talking about being passionate about your subject matter. And aside from getting the 4th edition of the book and really going from there, what is the best advice you'd give to someone who is just starting out and decided that they want to start a podcast in this sea of podcasts?
So the first thing I would say is map out 10 shows. Map out 10 shows. Try to sit down and come up with 10 shows or 10 ideas for different episodes. And if at all possible, have a stopwatch going, because depending on how many topics you can come up with within those 10 topics, if it takes you 30 seconds to a minute, then not only have you found your passion, but you definitely have the chops to put a podcast together. If it takes a little longer, like say it takes you a minute per, if it takes you 10 minutes or even 20 minutes, you might want to rethink the direction of that podcast before you've even recorded a word. I know that there's a popular sentiment of fire up the mics and go for it. It's great. But the problem is that you see a lot of people pod fade, which is a term for when either a show hits a low point or eventually just disappears. And I've seen shows disappear within 3 episodes. 3 episodes and are done. And it's because they didn't do any pre-planning, any show prep. So if you can fire off 10 topics for a podcast, then you're like, I think I'm on a good stretch. Some podcasts have content already built in. If you're doing an anthology podcast, if you're doing a storytelling podcast and you've already got stuff written, well then there's your show material, so you don't have to worry about that. If you've got a really broad, like yourself, Izolda, if you've got a broad network of people that you can reach out to and interview, then again, that adds to the repertoire of your show. Once you have those 10 episodes mapped out, then come up with a schedule. Come up with a tight little schedule. Okay, am I gonna do this on a weekly basis or a bi-weekly basis? And I go into the pros and cons in the book about the joys of doing something weekly versus the joys of doing something bi-weekly versus doing something monthly. You have to find a schedule that fits your life work balance. Mm-hmm. And then after you map out the schedule, after you map out the first 10 shows, that's when you have to take a step back and go, I'm doing this because I love this. And I would recommend staying as far away from analytics as possible. Just stay away from them, because that can sometimes be a very aggravating thing. You're doing all this great programming, you're creating all this great content, and then you look at the numbers and you go, that's it? Now, granted, If you start thinking about doing sponsorship, you start thinking about doing affiliate programs, that might be something of a game changer, and you have to deal with the analytics. But I can tell you, sometimes when you're podcasting, it feels like you are basically just screaming to the void. And that's when you have to say, okay, you know what? There are going to be some days where I feel like we have a lively crowd, a great audience, and there are going to be other times where you just feel like it's just you and a microphone. But whatever it is, you podcast with the same energy level as if you've got 10 listeners or if you've got 10,000 listeners. If you start losing yourself in the analytics, that's a heavy rabbit hole to try to come out of. And I just try to tell people the analytics will come, but even if they don't worry about it. You're there because you want to be there.
Absolutely. And it's what you just said, you're there because you want to be there. I think that takes us right back to, are you passionate about what you're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you are, then you want to be there. You want to shout it to the world, if you will. If you're not, it's going to peter out. You're going to get to that point, I think. Yeah, where it's done. And here's what's interesting about that is that we have, I don't know, I actually don't know what the numbers are. I'm sure you do, thousands upon thousands of podcasts out there. And there are some that I listen to religiously. And there are some that I try and go, not for me. But there's probably somebody out there who's listening to that one podcast as religiously as I listen to the ones I listen to. So there's room, it seems like, for many different ideas, many different styles, but they're not all going to suit everybody's tastes. As the author of this book, what do you think about that? This idea of there's either something for everyone, or there are just some podcasts that are going to become more well-known than others, and those are the winds of fate. So
I just did a quick little search on Google.
Mm-hmm.
And according to podcastinsights.com, who specialize in podcast statistics, they basically say there are currently over 1 million podcasts out there.
Wow.
That's a big jump. It's a big jump from when Chuck and I started podcasting for Dummies, the first edition, where I believe we said there were 5,000 live.
Wow.
And that doesn't surprise me at all. They also said that if they were to do a count as of April 2020, there were over 30 million episodes accessible in podcasting. So basically, if you listen to podcasts from sunup to sundown, you could never run out of content. Let's just be honest. You would never run out of content. But where it gets tough as a podcast creator, as a content creator, is making sure that people keep coming back. And yeah, there are going to be some shows that you look at the top and you go, not for me. And you go on to another podcast.
Mm-hmm.
There were episodes of Note to Self that I'm like, oh my God, this speaks to me. And there were some other episodes like, I'll skip that one, go to another one. There are podcasts that you just have as a podcast creator, you have to say to yourself, this is gonna appeal to a certain section of my podcast demographic, and this one's going to appeal to another section of my demographic. Is there a magic bullet that keeps everybody coming back? If there is, I would say that shelf life can be very limited. When I was listening to Welcome to Night Vale, good example. When I was listening to Welcome to Night Vale, I was fascinated by season 1. I was absolutely fascinated by season 1. Season 2, I began to see, and I think this also had to do with the fact that instead of listening to Welcome to Night Vale in small doses, I was binging Welcome to Night Vale.
Mm-hmm.
And when you binge something, that's when you notice the patterns.
Mm-hmm.
You notice the patterns and how things are done. And when I was in season 2, I was like, okay, I'm starting to see the beats in this and how this works. And then after a while, I was like, okay, so I decided to give Welcome to Night Vale a break. And then after I gave it a break, they launched, the same creators launched another podcast, and I said, oh, okay, well let's listen. And within the first episode, I said, there's a beat. I mean, I was able to pick out the beats, which were exactly the same from Welcome to Night Vale. It was just a different voice and a different story.
Mm-hmm.
But there was something missing. For me, there was something missing there. And I guess that's the difference between being a hardcore fan and being a fan. Hardcore fans, you throw anything at the fans, they will gobble it up. I was not that fan. I was the one that really liked the uniqueness of Welcome to Night Vale. But then by the last time I listened to Welcome to Night Vale, I'm like, something has changed. And I couldn't tell if they had changed or I had changed, or it might have been a bit of both. And so the lesson that I walked away from that as a content creator is that I should always try to find something new or something fun to do, so that the audience is also kept guessing as to what's coming next. Good example is I do a podcast with some buddies of mine that I run within the video game Destiny, and it's called Happy Hour from the Tower. And we have started this thing where we will randomly ask guests to come on the show and give their opinions on things. We've also done interviews. We've also talked about play strategies, and we've also just talked about the game and issues around the game.
Mm-hmm.
So I do feel like we have a rotating arsenal of content, so that people know, okay, this will be an interview show. They're interviewing a streamer. They're interviewing voice talent. Oh, now they're just talking about the game itself. They're getting nitty gritty into the game. Oh, now we're talking about strats and what works here. So instead of falling into a rut, which I think some podcasts can happen to some podcasts, there are other podcasts that try to reinvent themselves. But even when you're reinventing it, and again, it's in the book, I talk about how you don't want to dramatically reinvent yourself. It would be like as if Isolde, you were to take this podcast and go, I need to mix things up, and suddenly you turned it into a political talk show. And you did that for 3 episodes, and then on episode 4 of the reimagining of the creative mindset, suddenly you turned it into a cooking class.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to take such a wide turn or go on off such a weird tangent that you start losing your audience. And it's a hard thing to do. While podcasting, as we say, podcasting is easy, but podcasting is also hard. And this is one of the hard aspects of it.
And that's so fascinating, because within what you just said is something so interesting to me. This idea of pivoting and deciding, what if I want to retool or course correct somehow? You're asking your fans to be diehard fans,
Mm-hmm.
because you're asking them to come on the journey with you, whether or not you do it on purpose. Like, I renamed this podcast from, you called it the Creative Mindset, and it actually got renamed this summer to the Innovative Mindset Podcast.
Right.
And you called it the Creative Mindset Podcast because it sticks. And it's so interesting to me, this idea that, who are we? When we're listening, what is our role in the relationship to the podcaster? If I'm a big fan, and I'm a big fan of yours, so whatever you do, I'm there, right? But
Right.
but if I'm just a fan and you decide to go somewhere that I can't follow, then what does that do to our relationship as content creator and content consumer? And how do we, as content creators, keep those lines of communication open? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's also, ironically, it ties back to Happy Hour. The guys who are the people behind the video game Destiny, they make an absolutely stunning game, in my opinion. It is artistically beautiful. It is mechanically fun to play. There's all these great activities they have, The only downside of Destiny is they try to make a game that's one size fits all. They want to be, as many games want to be. They want to be the next World of Warcraft, or they want to be the next Fall Guys, or they want to be the next the next Among Us. They want to be the next big thing, but they want to be the next big thing that's got legs, and you want to keep coming back and keep playing it and keep playing it and keep playing it. And the truth of the matter is, one size does not fit all.
Mm-hmm.
You can say that about video games. You can definitely say that about podcasting. You can say that about content creation. I know that there are people that will go on the journey with me when I launch Happy Hour from the Tower, right? But the people that are on the journey with me with the shared desk, they're not necessarily going to want a podcast on a video game that they maybe probably don't play.
Mm-hmm.
The people who are listening to the Destiny podcast and they're enjoying it, they may really enjoy the energy level and the stuff that I bring to that, but they're not going to immediately follow me over to the shared desk
Mm-hmm.
and listen to me and my wife talk about things that writers do. It's really hard to come up with a one size fits all podcast, and I think that when it comes to the listener base, I just make it an assumption that the listener base, it's also, and it can also be looked at in my writing. The same listener base that listens to Happy Hour may or may not follow me over to the shared desk. They may or may not follow me over to different interview podcasts that I'm doing. They may not even follow me over to the Podcasting for Dummies companion podcast, which is basically a deep dive into the topics that we cover in the book. So yeah, I don't have, and it's the same thing with writing. The people that are fans of mine from Moravia probably didn't follow me over to the Ministry of Peculiar Occurrences, because it was such a departure. It was, I'm doing epic swordplay fantasy, and then I go over and I do steampunk. And I don't expect those audiences to follow me over and say, well, you know what? The guy that entertained me so much with steampunk, he wrote Twitch for Dummies, so I'm going to pick that up. That doesn't happen either. But whenever I find people that pop up and meet me at a book signing or online on Twitch, the first question is, I said, how'd you find me? And I have found that there are people who have found me through all these different sources. And that's where I come back to something I said in our very first interview, where I said, I don't consider myself a science fiction fantasy writer. I don't consider myself a content creator. I consider myself an entertainer.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm multifaceted in that way. I don't look for the one size fits all under my brand. But if someone were to say, well, then T, what is your brand? I would say I'm a brand of reliability. If you pick up my steampunk, you're going to enjoy it. If you pick up my fantasy, you're going to enjoy it. If you listen to my podcast on Happy Hour, you're going to have fun listening to it. That's what I want. I don't want to be the guy, oh, that's the guy who did the Ministry of Peculiar Occurrences. I want to be the guy that goes, or I want to be the guy that people say, oh, that's T. Morris. He does really good stuff.
And what you just said carries over into the next word that I think is so important, because it's not just that you do really good stuff, it's that you do really good stuff consistently.
Yes, consistency. I am more consistent at podcasting than I am at blogging. I'll be the first one to tell you that. But sometimes, and I do tell people this, give yourself a break. If life happens, your podcast may go a week or 2 weeks or maybe even a month before a new episode pops up. And that's okay. That is more than okay. Life does happen.
Mm-hmm.
People tend to forget that when they're watching, say, their favorite series, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or This Is Us or what have you on television, there are times where you'll get new show, and then suddenly there's a break, or there's a 2-week break, and people are going, what's going on? And it's because life happens. And sometimes a show does not get completed. There's a writer's strike. There's a holiday. I mean, um, I have seen it. I've seen it both in the podcasting and the streaming community where people say you can't take a break. You cannot take a break. You've got to constantly be creating content, constantly. But this is how people burn out. And if you as a creator are not in the right mindset, if you're not in a good spot mentally as well as physically, then you're creating content for content's sake, and it's a zero-sum game. And so what I aim for is I aim for consistency, but my audience also knows that if something happens, if something's going on, when I start the next podcast, I go, yeah, you've been wondering where we've been? Well, we've been writing books. We've been writing books. And as we're a writing podcast, we think that's pretty important. So I just tell people to make sure that they give themselves a break, and give themselves a little bit of leeway. Because yes, consistency does matter. I mean, I can say without equivocation, we still have an audience for the Shared Desk. But I remember one year, my wife and I put out 5 episodes in one year, and people were like, "What's going on with you two?" And it's like, "Look, we've just been really busy." And then the following year, we put out 30 episodes. I mean, when we finally hit show 100, it took us like 4 years to reach show 100, which is unheard of, but we made it. And we do give ourselves a little bit of playful ribbing about it. It just that's what I tell people. I go, yeah, life happens. We're going, and yes, consistency does matter in podcasting, but so long as you are putting out the content on a consistent basis and you own it, if there's a break, communication with your audience, that's worth it. That is a worthwhile investment.
Oh, agreed completely. And it's so funny because what I just advised someone who was feeling burnt out about ending a season. You know, she said, I have to do it weekly. I have to. And I said, no, you can take a break. Say that this next episode's going to end your season and you'll be back in a few weeks with season 2.
And that,
and it worked. And she's really,
Mm-hmm.
she's happy to be there. And so one of the things that I think that we aren't thinking in these terms, but I think we can be, is in some ways podcasting to me is sort of like the Wild West. In many ways, anything goes because we who are the podcasters, we're making up the rules.
I think it has refined itself. It's less the Wild West and more like the industrial age.
Okay.
I would say that yeah, we were at the Wild West in 2005. Oh man, yeah. You know that scene in the Ron Howard movie Far and Away, where they did they shot the Oklahoma, I think it's the Oklahoma expansion.
Uh-huh.
It's where they basically all lined up. The guy shoots the gun, and then all the settlers just sprint into the prairie to try to basically claim a spot of land. That was us in 2005.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward about 15 years, I would say we're now in the industrial age where you've got some people that are, they're aware of the rules, but they're trying to see how far they can bend them.
Okay.
And this is before the days of, the, Better Business Bureau and the EPA and the FCC. I mean, as I said before, the FCC, has zero skin in the game when it comes to podcasts. They're still trying to understand and figure out and navigate podcasting. Now, one hand that has been very, very present in both podcasting and in streaming as well is the RIAA, the Recording Industry Association of America. These folks are very quick with the cease and desists, and it really does affect people who want to have music playing in the background or have some type of bed music playing throughout. And it's really thrown some people. But as I said in another For Dummies book, I said right now there is a there's a unique relationship between Spotify and content creators, where Spotify is like, if you've got our music in the background, that's fine. You're more than welcome to use our music in the background. But I did say this, but at any time, this relationship could change.
Mm-hmm.
And it has, on a very dramatic level. so what I tell people is that, yeah, you are making the rules. You are making the rules up, but you're also testing the rules as well. And the way I tell it to people is, treat your podcast as if you would treat going live on radio or going live on. I'm trying very hard to clean up some of the more colorful words that I've used in my video gaming streams, which sometimes slip out into podcasting. I'm trying to clean that up because I am now becoming an ambassador to a nonprofit called No Kid Hungry.
Mm.
I'm raising money to make sure that kids who are reliant on school lunches get fed, especially during this time of the coronavirus. So if I'm dropping the occasional F-bomb in my stream, maybe that's not such a smart move when I'm trying to get in good with this group, No Kid Hungry. So yeah, but that's what I'm saying is that I'm trying to treat my stream and my podcast just like as if I was on mainstream terrestrial radio, where I can go on ahead and follow the rules as dictated by the FCC. It also makes you a better streamer, and it makes you a better podcaster. It makes you a better content creator because now you have guidelines that you can follow. It's great being a trailblazer. Don't get me wrong. I loved being a trailblazer back in 2005. But I also ran into those trailblazers that not only made up the rules as they went, they blatantly ignored the rules moving forward. Case in point, I was illegally recorded once for a podcast.
What?
Oh yeah. This was a very popular podcast, and they were trying to get into a heated exchange with me, and I found out when their podcast aired, they were recording the whole thing. The good news is I took the high road, and I didn't fall for the bait, but they were doing that. I've also seen interview podcasts take a terrible turn because they go, well, the rules don't apply to us, so we can ask whatever we want. And they wind up putting their guests in really awkward situations.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then you've got people that think it'd be funny to do something for their podcast that's outrageous or ridiculous or over the top. And a lot of these podcasts, these shock jock podcasts, if you will, they all say, well, we're trying to be like Howard Stern of podcasting. But here's what they missed about Howard Stern, and this is one of the reasons why I respect Howard Stern so much, not just as a broadcaster, but just as a media and content creator. He himself did not do anything outrageous. He wanted to encourage others to see how far they would push it just to get on the radio. And one step beyond that was that he himself never broke the rules of the FCC. Oh, he tested them. He definitely tested them, but he never broke the rules. Versus other Howard Stern knockoffs who were all trying to be just as quote unquote outrageous as he was, but some of them got in trouble with the law
mm-hmm.
because they themselves were actively involved in it. And that's where I'm saying that's the difference. There's a difference between saying we're going to do this to be outrageous versus I want to see how outrageous you're going to push just to get on terrestrial radio. And that's where I say that, yeah, it's great to be a trailblazer, but you can also burn bridges and also make some really, really dumb mistakes that could get you into legal issues. I mean, yeah, did I have a lawsuit? I could have had a lawsuit, but were they worth my time? No, they were not worth my time.
Especially since you took the high road, which is not surprising to me that you
Thank you.
took the high road. Oh, and yet, it's interesting. I had Bill, the author Bill Fitzhugh, on the show just a few days ago,
Right.
actually. And I was a DJ many moons ago. He was a DJ many moons ago, and we were talking about the differences between on the radio and a podcast. And he said, "Do you need to do a legal ID?" Which is giving the ID of the show and the station on every hour on the hour plus or minus 2 minutes. And I said, "No, you don't need to do that for a podcast." And he said, "Okay, so what are the rules?" And I went, that's a really good question,
Right.
because he swore, he cussed, and he said, "Oh, maybe I'm not supposed to do that." And I said, "No, I'll just put the little E for explicit on and we're good to go."
And
And he
you're good.
goes, "Yeah."
Right.
And so it's really interesting that it to me, and maybe it's because I'm not particularly a rule breaker or a trailblazer in this way, I feel like it's limitless. I feel like whatever we want to talk about, we get to talk about,
Oh yeah.
and we can push it to the philosophy and the ideas. And what are your thoughts on that, this idea of rules? You said, don't break all the rules, but what are the rules of podcasting? What are we adhering to here when we create this content?
Well, again, it goes back to the format of the show that you create and what you want to do with it. For example, with Happy Hour from the Tower, I have purposely put I break it up into two segments. I will I basically say, okay, guys, for the first half of the show, we're going to do this. The second half of the show, we're going to do this. I keep an eye on the clock, and and after about 20, 30 minutes, once I think that we've wrapped up the segment, I said, okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we get back, we're going to talk about this and this right after this message. And then I drop in either a sponsor, or I drop in a promo for another podcast, or I drop in, um, you know, uh, if someone has paid for a special spot, I go ahead and do that as well. And then we come back to the show. That's for Happy Hour. For the Shared Desk, it's just a straight shot through.
Hmm.
It's just a straight shot through. And then when we did the Ministry of Peculiar Occurrences podcast, we were doing Tales from the Archives, which is a bunch of short stories. If the short story went over an hour, I would purposely put in a break. And the way I look at it from that perspective is, if we put in a break, it gives people a chance to pause their player. Where it's like, okay, we're physically taking a break here. They can maybe talk to somebody. They can do this. They can do that. That way, they don't have to pause it and pause it. Or just have a weird stopping point. Um, it really is. It is free form. It is a free form. Um, no holds barred. If you want to be explicit, you can be explicit. If you want to adhere to a station ID clock or something like that, you could do that too if you wanted to. Some people did it as a way of being able to segue onto terrestrial or satellite radio, but
Hmm.
even then, segueing to terrestrial and satellite radio, um, now I'm seeing more and more people saying, "Well, I don't want to segue in that direction. I'm going to go in the other direction. I want to get my show picked up by Netflix or Amazon or something like that," and that is a possibility too. But I mean, if I'm if I like for Happy Hour, I have two affiliates that I get. If people order using a code, or if they use a special link, we get a kickback from that. So we actually drop in ads for them in our show.
Hmm.
um, and that's just that's basic revenue. So if you've got some type of revenue coming in, then yeah, you should format your podcast accordingly. Some people go, oh, I just put stuff at the end. Well, the problem with putting stuff at the end and stuff in the beginning is that if you put stuff at the end and at the beginning, people either scroll through it, or they'll just hear the ads and they'll cut them off. So I purposely put, knowing if there's an affiliate involved, I will put a break in the middle of a show.
Hmm.
But it's different from every show. It's different for every podcast. You've got to find the format that works best for your podcast. And that is a freedom that you have in podcasting that you may not get when you're on terrestrial radio or when you're on television. And it's something I think YouTube needs to learn, because I tell you, YouTube has been they've been the worst at it. They will throw in random random ads, and there's only a minute left on my video, and I'm just
Right.
like, guys, come on. And I really think that again, it comes back to the problems of freeform entertainment like this, freeform infotainment, if you will, because we're not adhering to a clock. The algorithms that ad machines say, oh, we're going to throw an ad in here, can really be a bad place to throw in an ad. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you just have to, because I tried doing podcasts where I actually did the 0, the 15, the 30, and the 45. Oh, and I was like, oh, this is why I got our radio. Yeah. So now if I do a break anywhere, it's usually on the halfway point. And it's again, it's on what kind of show do you want to create?
Yeah, absolutely. And you want to market so that it doesn't feel like it is interrupting, but rather is a natural stopping point or
Mhm.
pausing point so that then you can pick up into the next space. But there's, you said something that I think is really interesting. You said no matter what the format, and there are so many formats. There's, you know, interview style, one person pontificating,
Mhm.
true crime, reading an entire book like you did so
Right.
revolutionarily, I will say, back in 2005. What is it limitless, or are there boundaries for the kinds of things people can do with podcasts?
I do think it is really up to the content creator themselves.
Okay.
They can go as far and as deep into a topic as they want. They can go into something as edgy as polyamory podcasts. There, you can find quite a few of them online.
Mm-hmm.
If you wanted to talk about critical thinking, uh, you can go on ahead and critical thinking over Christianity. You can do stuff like that. You can be as forward thinking and as edgy and as brutal as you want to be. There are podcasts, and I've heard samplings of them. I've heard podcasts that have made my blood run cold, and it's the same thing that you get from the internet. It's I remember saying when I was teaching courses on web design, I said the great thing about the internet is that everyone has a voice, but the worst thing about the internet is that everyone has a voice.
Mm-hmm.
You run into podcasts that promote hate, that promote fear, that promote violence. But on the same side, you also have podcasts that are the opposite extreme. I remember listening to a podcast. I can't even remember the name. I think I blocked the title of the podcast out, but it was two um, self uh, self-admitted um, blonde princesses
Oh.
in LA,
Mm-hmm.
and they were talking about how great their lives were. And after 5 minutes, I just said, I really need to have this noise turned off.
Mm-hmm.
And I found it just as offensive as some of the hate podcasts that someone challenged me to listen to. Um, but the thing is, it is limitless, and but it comes with just as much responsibility as anything else you do in content creation. If you are if you're creating quality content, and the audience that you're trying to reach, and that the content you're reaching, the content you're creating, you can stand by. That's all you need. That is all you need to have a successful podcast. Um, and I know I have for all the bad stuff that I've heard in podcasting, I can rattle off 10 or 20 podcasts, this one included,
Oh.
as podcasts that I always go back to because I genuinely enjoy listening to these podcasts. And it is really heartbreaking when you lose those kind of podcasts. Case in point, there was a podcast I loved listening to, not necessarily for the not necessarily because it was so riveting, or it was so, or it was the edginess of the content. It was just the concept behind it. It was two psychologists, and they were both young psychologists. They were like in their late 20s, maybe early 30s, and they were both avid video gamers. So they had a podcast called Headshots, which was the intersection of psychology and video gaming.
Hmm.
And I could not get enough of this podcast. And when they basically said, yeah, we're closing our doors, it broke my heart, because I got to look at video games in such a different way. Um, there was one video game in particular that they talked about, where the game had gone into such a deep analysis and such a deep dive of psychosis and post-traumatic stress disorder and trauma and schizophrenia, that at the very beginning of every time you played the game, it would give you a warning and a website to visit if you started to feel off.
Hmm.
And the two psychologists said, well, when I first saw this, I was like, okay, this is hype. They're just hyping it. They're just trying to get you. And he said, and about 10 minutes in, I'm like, oh, okay, this is going to hurt. And at the very end of their conversation, I remember they said, and these are two psychologists, said, I loved this game, but I would never recommend it to any of my friends. And it was just so fascinating listening to them dissect that. And I love that, because I'm like, you could not find this anywhere else but a podcast. And that's what I gravitate towards. I gravitate towards the podcasts that not only entertain me, but make me think. And if they do both, even better.
Absolutely. That's my favorite kind of podcast to listen to as well. And it sparks curiosity when I get to hear a podcast like that makes me go, oh, and now I want to know this, and now I want to know that.
Right.
That's the ultimate for me in podcast listening and podcast creation. And it's so fascinating to get to talk to you about this, because you're such also an avid gamer. I went to a virtual conference this weekend for voice actors, and spent my brain is full today, because I spent the weekend with a bunch of voice acting professionals learning all about it. And here's what's interesting. First, there was an entire session dedicated to podcasting in this
Oh, wow.
in this conference. And second, there was also another session dedicated to voice acting for video games. So having you on the show today is just the perfect jumping off point, and also the punctuation mark to my weekend. But this idea of creatives creating content in podcast form and also in video game form for everyone else to hear, because it's a voice medium. This idea here of how do we marry the two, and it sounds to me like so much of what you're doing with streaming does exactly that.
It does. Because the thing is that by definition, podcasting is the delivery of media through an RSS feed. And not to get too technical, but basically RSS is the script language. It's a markup language, and it's a language that helps blogs go. And if you've got a blog, you have an RSS feed, and with the proper plugin or the proper adjustment, you can make that RSS feed podcast ready. But then streaming came along, and people started saying, well, I'm going to do a podcast, but they were doing it on the stream. And there was a real contention for a while about how if you're streaming, but you don't have an RSS feed and you don't have a separate file for that's being distributed by RSS, then you are not podcasting.
Hmm.
You're basically just slap. And a lot of people did this in the early days. If they didn't want to be bothered with RSS feeds or blogs, what they would do is they would basically just get a little image that says podcast, and they'd put it next to whatever media they'd upload to their website. Again, that's not a podcast. But what really changed things, and what was really the marriage of streaming and podcasting, was when, okay, so we say we're doing a podcast, but it is being distributed. people aren't going to your website. They're going to their apps. They're going to Twitter. They're going to Twitch. They're going to YouTube. They're seeing it happen live.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when the fourth edition was rolling out, I'm like, I really got to look at this. And this is right off, this is coming off the heels of doing Twitch for Dummies. And I started to see the marriage between the two. And I was like, okay, here's the midpoint that we're finding here. This is what podcasting has evolved into. And I think that's also part of the success that I've had with podcasting is that I feel like I have evolved with the technology. I'm no longer saying this is a podcast and nothing else counts.
Mm-hmm.
You can't say that anymore, especially with the way Spotify has stepped in, the way streaming as a technology has stepped in and helped distribute podcasts without an RSS feed. It's really fascinating. Now, we still argue that yes, when we talk about podcasting, here is the official definition of it. Boom, done. Now, are we saying that is the be all and end all? Absolutely not, because podcasts like rock bands, like video games, like on-screen personalities, they all can evolve. They can all find a new direction, find a new path. At their core, they will still be a podcast, but then they might be a podcast that you catch when the stream happens.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you still want to have that old school podcast approach to things, okay, get into streaming, then take that stream, download it, turn it into your podcast. And that, it becomes part of your workflow. There's,
mm-hmm.
Again, it goes back to that limitless aspect of it. Not only is the topics and the subject matter that you can talk about limitless in podcasting, so is the way. Now we have many different ways of distributing our media from one point to a whole bunch of others. And that's the beautiful thing about podcasting. Podcasting as a technology is limitless. And I'm very, very proud to be a part of this. And I've been very, very proud to be a part of this book since the beginning.
And it's so wonderful to hear you say that, because I have the third edition, so I'm going to get the fourth edition now, but
well, you're going to be in it. So there's that too. So
that's so cool and exciting. Well, there's something that you just said that I think that I really want to focus in on. And this is the idea of sharing aspects of what you're doing, right? You can do it through the stream. You can do it, change it into a video and put it up on YouTube, which I do with this show. Every episode gets transferred into a video and gets uploaded to YouTube, things like that. But creatives are also using podcasts to share aspects of their work, right? So if mm-hmm. you can do it with writing, you can do it. You can have an audio podcast talking about paintings or your paintings, and it still works. The voice actors that I was with this whole weekend, a lot of them hire themselves out to voice podcasts, to do the intros and outros, things like that. So there's sort of an intersection of creativity and content creation here that is different than we might have thought possible back in 2005. What are your thoughts on that?
So that honestly does not surprise me. I think that there is an intersection of all these different creative outlets that you're seeing evolve in podcasting and in streaming media and things like that. One of the things that I think that hasn't changed though is there are a lot of people that refuse to podcast, or they hate podcasting because they quote unquote don't like the sound of their own voice. Mm. And my biggest fault with that is, if you want a podcast, don't worry about your voice. Don't worry about your voice. You will find your voice. I know that when I started podcasting, my own voice was very rough, and I'm a theater major. I'm a former SAG-AFTRA member. I've done all that. I've done radio. I have I have done that, and I still, you know, when podcasting came out, I'm like, okay, I got to find my groove with this. And then when I started streaming, I had to find my groove in streaming as well. Um, I think there is a lot that you can do where you intersect with different mediums and different approaches. And I also think there's even a demand if voice actors were to actually do podcasts about the voice acting industry, that would be something that people would listen to, especially for people who want to break into dubbing animes for American audiences, or being a voiceover talent in video games. And the best part about what I've noticed, at least with Happy Hour from the Tower, is how accessible a lot of these voice actors make themselves. We've had several of the voice actors from Destiny on Happy Hour from the Tower, and those are some of our favorite interviews because they are so much fun, and they don't pull any punches, and they're happy to be there. We even had the voice director, which was really fascinating, because then we said, okay, so we've had all these voice talent on the show. So my big question is, what do you look for? And, you know, we get to ask questions like, do you ever get a little starstruck? And the guy was like, oh yeah. He basically said that, and this guy, Kevin McMullen, that was his name, Kevin McMullen. And he's worked with some incredible people. He's worked with, Nathan Fillion. He's worked with Gina Torres. He's worked with Lance Reddick just on Destiny alone. And he said, but I was totally gobsmacked when Frank Langella walked into the room.
Oh.
And I said, yeah, I could see that. You know, because I've been a fan of his since 78 Dracula. I remember those days. Yeah.
Frank Langella,
Richard Donner,
Lena Olin. Oh, what a great movie.
And Laurence Olivier as Van Helsing.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. And he was like, you know, they were, you know, he was talking to him, just loosen up, and he was like, yeah, my grandson talked me into doing this gig. And he's, you know, and they're telling these stories. I am howling. I'm like, yeah, this is really cool. But no, and he said, and the thing was, after we got him, you know, warmed up and he was ready to go, guy was a professional. And those type of behind the scene, you know, people would say, a podcast about voice acting? Are you kidding me? People would eat that up. Even people who aren't interested, because they get that behind the scenes look.
Absolutely. And there are several great podcasts about voice acting in games, voice acting in animation, and all of that, and also about the business of voice acting. That's what this conference was all about. And it's about how voice actors can flourish and have flourished, especially during this time of COVID, which is really weird for a lot of people, because so much other production has shut down that voice acting has been in many ways the only thing people could do during the pandemic. But what's interesting to me about what you just said, this idea of being forward thinking, there's new technology coming every day, right?
Yep.
And so things like AI and Alexa, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that, and how that will, those voice first or voice forward technologies, how are they going to interact with, and if they already are, because I don't know, how do they and how might they interact with podcasting?
So I kind of put together, or at least I kind of feel like the way I do about echo technology and AI and voice recognition stuff, I think it's a great tool. Do I think that my job as a podcaster or an actor's job as an actor is in trouble if they can just be digitally reproduced and then put into a crowd scene somewhere or something like that? The answer is, I'm not worried about it. Because what I'm seeing, at least from what I'm seeing in film, is I'm seeing people start to stray further away from CG and coming more back towards working with extras, working with people, and working on actual sets. I think a really good example is the trailer for Dune that came out around the time of this podcast, or around recording of this podcast, rather, you can see that they hired a lot of extras to be physically on a set. You can also see where, yeah, there might be some computer imagery, but now, unlike when the technology was first introduced, oh wow, we can just put virtual people in the stands. But now you look at those things and you go, yeah, those people are computerized,
Right.
because they're not moving right, And it's the same thing with voice. It's real hard. It is real hard, even as good as Alexa is. It's real hard to reproduce that voice. It's real hard to produce the human nuances of voice, and I think that if I think that where AI comes into play is that AI is making these podcasts more accessible. I mean, if I wanted to, I could basically have my podcast, because they're now available on Spotify. I can now consume my podcast now through Spotify. Or sorry, through a virtual assistant, through something like Alexa or something like that. And I think that's great. Do I think that AI voice talent will replace actors? No, I don't. I just don't, because they tried doing that with actors, and they've even gone so far as to try and I find the technology a little unsettling, but they've tried to recreate actors when they were younger. I can tell you where it worked and where it didn't work. Where it worked was in Ant-Man, the original Ant-Man. And Michael Douglas comes in, and it's supposed to be in the 80s, and it looked like Michael Douglas. It looked like Michael Douglas right off the set of Romancing the Stone. And then, the rest of the movie is set in present day, and of course it's regular Michael Douglas. But man, the CG they did on Michael Douglas to make him look younger was phenomenal. And in the same vein, while they made him look younger, they had to age up Hallie Atwell. And they obviously used they were actually using prosthetics with her. And that's the point. They digitally did it with Michael Douglas. They used traditional images, the traditional stuff with Hallie Atwell, and it worked brilliantly. Where it didn't work, Rogue One. When you see the images of Peter Cushing as Grand Moff Tarkin, my brain wasn't buying it. My brain was just like, no, that's not him.
Right.
And they could have found an actor, and I could have even named the actor they could have found that could have been a stand-in, and they could just put him in there and it would have been fine. But they tried to do this computer technology where it looked like Peter Cushing from the 70s, and it looked off. It just looked weird. And that's why I am I'm a tech nerd. I love gadgets. I mean, we've got 3 of these Alexas throughout the house. We love them. But I'm sorry, 4. We got 4 of them. But I also think that that there are limitations. There are limitations there, because we still have a ways to go if we're in trouble that way. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And Carrie Fisher, I believe, she was also digitized.
She was digitized at the very end.
And it was awful. It was horrifying. Just because there was zero life in her.
Her face looked flat.
Yeah.
I remember going, I don't remember Carrie Fisher looking that horse face. I mean, it looked like her face was stretched and flat. And I'm like, that's weird. And yeah. I still love Rogue One. Don't get me wrong. I love Rogue One, but those 2 bits were a little much for me to take.
Yeah. It was, Rogue One is great, to get off topic a little bit, but Rogue One is great, except for it was a little hard for me watching the movie knowing that everyone was going to die.
Yeah.
Because if they hadn't died, they'd have been the heroes in A New Hope,
Right. Exactly.
So you knew going in that they were all going to die, and this was
going to end badly. Yeah.
Right.
I know.
Yeah, but it was a great movie. I agree.
Now it's funny you should bring up tangents though, because that's the thing. That's another one of the great things about podcasting that I tend to tell people is that tangents tend to be synonymous with podcasts. You know that you will be talking on one subject, and then suddenly you go off on a tangent. And I like to tell people, if you're going to go off on a tangent, go for it. Be 100% committed to that tangent. Just make sure to watch the time and bring it back. Because if you don't bring it back, that's when you start losing people. Tangents are cool in podcasting, so long as you keep them on a short leash. And that was seamless. Well done, Isolde.
Well, I learned from the best, so there
we
you
are.
go. Podcasting for Dummies, third edition,
Ding.
has been my go-to. So speaking of that, speaking of the fourth edition, which is out today, yay! What has happened to podcasting that has surprised you or inspired you the most throughout your podcasting career and trajectory? What has been the most surprising and inspiring thing to you?
Oh wow. There's actually a two-part answer to that. I would say the first part is I underestimated the community, and I think that's one of the things that has always inspired me in podcasting has been the community that not just the community based around my podcast, but the podcasting community in general. My life took a really dark turn in at about was it 11 years ago? It was about 11 years ago. Yeah. It was the beginning of the year. It was beginning of 2010. And my wife at that time passed away due to complications of the flu. And it just completely sidelined me. It was a real rough time too, because what made it even more complicated was we were in the middle of a divorce, so we were separated. And then to add that complication more, my daughter at the time was 6.
Oh,
So no, 5. Excuse me, 5. So yeah, really, really rough time. And I really did not know what I was kind of lost. And the podcasting community shocked me in that they rallied around me, and more importantly, they rallied around my my daughter, and they did an all-day podcast marathon to like a benefit to raise money for her and her college degree, and her they raised a crap ton of money, and I was like I just didn't see it coming. I honestly just didn't see it coming. I was moved by it. I was touched by it, and I realized, okay, I'm part of something way bigger than just my podcasts. And every penny of that went straight into a college fund for her, and it kind of reaffirmed that I made the right choice by getting involved with podcasting. I made the right choice about coming, doing what I'm doing with podcasting, and it was very humbling. It was very humbling. The second part of that really blew my mind is actually involved with the streaming community. And this is when I started and present at the time of this recording, I'm celebrating all through the month of September my 3rd year as a streamer.
yeah.
I have been streaming content for 3 years now, and it has been a real education. And I very similar to podcasting. After a year of streaming, I said, I want to write a book on this. And that wound up being Twitch for Dummies. So but the thing I found so funny was that everything that I heard about podcasting, the podcasting community, how welcoming it is, how it's this, how it's that. Oh, it's great. It's going to change the way people consume media, et cetera, et cetera. Was the exact same thing I had heard a decade earlier when podcasting was just starting. And I remember looking at, I remember when I first started getting into it, my first year, I was looking at all these streamers that I started following and I started getting to know. And I said, you all have no idea the bumpy ride that is ahead of you. Because now I'm hearing people go, yeah, streaming's great, but it's starting to get a little saturated. It's starting to, and I'm like, yep, we said that too. You're not there yet. You're not there yet, but just hang tight, everybody. And it's funny how I just find it funny how it's the parallels. I've said this before, how the parallels between podcasting and streaming are so stark to me. It's a little overwhelming. And I just go, and when I, and sorry, then there's one more thing that has, how do I put this? There's no way to, I'm just gonna be blunt. There is no way to put this gently. The thing that I think has been has been sort of a jolt to the system, has been that is the way people reinvent history, in particular with podcasting. There was an article that came out in 2014. Yeah, 2015. Actually, it was 2015. It was 2015. An article came out from Wired Magazine, and it was Wired Magazine that basically said, the headline read, and I'm not exaggerating, the headline read, "Thanks to Welcome to Night Vale, podcast fiction is a thing." Needless to say, there was some pushback, right. and there was a lot of pushback on Wired's Facebook, because but this is the thing, was that I did write a rebuttal article, and it wound up on Tor.com, but I did I took a higher road, but I remember getting a little rankled by it, but saying, well, this is nothing new, because people seem to think that anything that happened before 2010 didn't happen. So a lot of there's been a lot of people who I love having these conversations with people. There was a conversation I was having with somebody. He came in and he was basically promoting the possibility of bringing podcasting services into our place of work. And I'm nodding and I'm listening to him, and I'm like, it's never going to fly here. And because I already knew that, I already knew how the attitude towards podcasting was. And I knew it was going to fly there because he wanted to charge a lot of money for it. And I was like, but I was going to let the guy speak. And there was a lull in the conversation. I think that because I think they were going off to talk about the different services that this gentleman was going to provide. And I said, so you've been podcasting for some time? And he looked at me and he gave me a smirk, and he was like, yeah, I'm one of the longtime veterans. And I went, oh, really? Now keep in mind, this is like 20, so I couldn't wait to see where we were with this. Again, this was like 2015, 2016. And I said, so how long have you been podcasting? Said, oh, I've been podcasting a long time. I've been podcasting since 2012.
Ooh.
And I sat there and I just nodded and smiled, and I said, keep at it. You're doing good. And he looked at me and he was like, do you podcast? And I go, yeah, I do. And he goes, how long have you been podcasting? And I'm just didn't blink an eye. I just stared at him. I said, I've been podcasting since 2005. I'm the first guy to podcast a novel from cover to cover, and I'm one of the authors of Podcasting for Dummies. And he stared at me, and he never took his eyes off me. He went into his coat pocket. He pulled out a card. He very tenderly handed it to me and said, would you like to come and speak at our event next month? And I just took the card and I looked at the card and I said, I'll be in touch. And I wound up speaking at his event. I mean, it's because it's funny how people just seem to think that podcasting is this new thing. And I'm like, folks, this is the 4th edition of Podcasting for Dummies. And we've been at this for nearly 15 years. And I take that back. It has been 15 years. In fact, it is 15 years. It was 15 years in July where I finished Moravia.
Wow.
I finished it the week before. I finished it the week before July 2nd. I remember this because I finished Moravia, and the following week I flew to Calgary, Alberta, for WesterCon 56. Can't believe I remember that, but it was
Wow.
WesterCon 56. It was it's the big West Coast North America convention for science fiction, and Dragon Moon Press, who was my publisher at the time, they, for the first time, we got ourselves a booth, and we had I think at that point Gwen had met two of her authors at that point. Gwen Gades, the head publisher of Dragon Moon, and that weekend, I want to say 10 authors from Dragon Moon, affiliated with Dragon Moon Press, flew in for this event. And I can even rattle off. We had two authors from Arizona. There was me. There was two Canadian authors. There was an author from Vermont, and this is not an exaggeration. We had an author from Hong Kong
Wow.
fly in for WesterCon 58. And we wound up not only having a huge presence at that convention, not only did we wind up throwing one of the best room parties, but I remember very vividly people coming up to the table and saying, "I just finished the Moravia podcast. Where's the Legacy of Moravia?" And I handed them and we sold a lot. We sold out of a few titles, but we sold a lot of books that weekend. Gwen said, "I've never come to an event where I've sold this many books," and we just attributed it to the podcast.
Yeah, and it was a beautiful way to bring the story to people in a different way.
Yeah, but the thing is, there are people that they just, apparently 2005 didn't happen. apparently none of this happened. Apparently nothing really happened until Aaron Mahnke dropped his first episode of Lore. And even then, Aaron Mahnke's lore didn't come out as Aaron Mahnke's lore. I mean, there was a build up to that.
Mhm.
Same thing with Welcome to Night Vale. There was a build up to that. And it does help when you have, like, New York studios that you can go in and record stuff in, or that you have, higher end talent, which is again part of the as you mentioned earlier, the Wild West attitude of
Mhm.
it's only been in recent years that SAG and Actors Equity recognized podcasting as a
Mhm.
thing.
Mhm.
Because I mean, there were people that were doing voiceovers and they were doing voice acting for podcasting, and they were either getting paid a stipend or they were getting something way below. But it was new, and nobody knew where to categorize it. Nobody knew where to put a podcast. So yeah, I do find it it's a little discouraging when you find out that there are people that they don't think anything happened before 2010. But I go ahead and I just nod and I go, "Look, if you want to believe that, that's okay." I let the work speak for me. That was the mantra of Alan Rickman, and if it worked for Alan Rickman, then it works for me.
Amen. And yet, I sometimes, quite frankly, get a little. It's not upset. It's concerned that it's a Google away. Finding out some of this information, you can Google it so easily, right? So it makes me wonder what's going on with the idea of research. Because if I were going to go, let's talk.
Do you really
about,
want to go down that tangent? Do you
I
really
know.
want to go down that rabbit hole?
That's another episode altogether.
The stories that I could tell about. Yeah, I mean, I've seen keynotes given by people who are considered quote unquote pioneers of podcasting, and you look them up, and they're one of those podcasts that happen to appear on iTunes, and they've got 5 episodes, and then they were done.
Mm.
Or they have a book on podcasting that they self-published, one book on podcasting, and they're the pioneers. And again, you're right. Yeah. I have done that to people. I have done that to people constantly. I've had people come onto my stream. They have come onto my stream, and they've said, "What do you know about this? What do you know about podcasting?" And I go, "Fair enough. Are you near a computer?" And they're like, "Yeah." I go, "Look up my name." And then they went, and they were like, and no kidding, I'm not, this is an exaggeration. The next thing that'll pop up in my chat will be, "Oh shit, you, you got books." And I'm like, "Keep going." "Oh, you spoke at the Library of Congress?" "Keep going." It's 5 minutes on Google. It's
Right.
5 minutes on Google. And then there's it's funny, and it's actually reached a point now, and this is what I love about the Twitch community. I had somebody, I've had several people, several prominent streamers that I don't know, but they're self-established, and they'll hold up a copy of Twitch for Dummies, take a photograph on it, and they said, "I just picked this up at the bookstore. I'm going to make it rich." And I've had friends that are featured in the book ping me and go, "Educate this guy." And I will come in the middle of their stream, and people will say in the Twitter feed, they'll go, "This book isn't real. That's a gag book, right?" And I will respond with a picture of me holding it at TwitchCon, and I was saying, "No, the book is real. How can I help you?" And the conversations that I have had with people have been a riot. And not only that, it's a spike in sales. It's because of that 5 minutes of research.
Mm-hmm.
And I just shake my head, because I go, when I try to land speaking gigs, the people that book me, they're never disappointed. They're always happy with my work. But the ones that don't, when I see the people that they do get, I'm like, "You're kidding me," right? And there are some podcasting events just in the DC area that have never returned my emails, and I'm like, "I am in your backyard. What is the problem?"
Right.
And and it kind of tied all the way back to the beginning of this conversation was, part of it is the Dummies, is the Dummies moniker. For whatever reason, that's a real turnoff, is for Dummies. Second thing is, I don't think I use the word monetize enough. And I get it. And I've had that happen to me before. I've had people say to me, "I don't care about creating content. I just want to know how to make money." And I'm like, "Well, you've already shot yourself in the foot, but okay, let's talk." And the thing is that I think that the some people just can't be bothered. And it's heartbreaking, because I'm like, we have this beautiful thing called the internet. This beautiful thing. It's not a card catalog. I can understand not wanting to research with a card catalog and the Dewey Decimal System. I can totally get behind that. But when you've got something that you could just literally, like when you said, "Oh, I don't know, there could be a couple thousand or hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there." As you're talking to me, I am typing in, "How many live podcasts are there currently?" And I got the answer. Boom. Within 5 minutes. And I just tell people, I just go, "Look, the internet is more than just cats and memes of
cats."
And memes of cats. And yeah, exactly. I mean, there's more to it than that. Okay. And now my cat is looking at me on my desk like, "Excuse me." And I'm like, "No, it's fine. It's fine." But,
There's nothing more important than you, Kitty. There's nothing more important.
Exactly. He's actually threatening me a little bit. He's making a fist right now. I'm like, "Would you stop?" Anyway, but yeah, it's just, it's a shame that people won't take that extra 5 minutes to just look up a name or look up a title. And I think, it would probably make things a lot easier to cope with.
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, believe me, research is now that truly is one of my passions. That is one of my passions. I basically tell people, when people say, "Did you read this article?" I go, "What's your source?"
Right.
And if it's a source I've never heard of, like right to the interwebs, and we look it up, and we look it up.
Absolutely. And that's I mean, that's a whole other conversation. We could another 4 hours could go by, but there is something about this idea to me that's so compelling about critical thinking and going, even especially podcast content. How do we know that this podcast content has veracity? How do we know that it's the truth? Well, we can do the research. You can go to, oh well, T. Morris. Yeah, the reason I had T. Morris in to talk about podcasting was because he wrote the book, right? So
Right.
so there's a lot to be said for doing that, and about being discerning. And it's funny to bring Bill Fitzhugh back, to name check him again. Bill, if you're listening, I had to do this for his episode. He the little skywriting thing, which I'm about to ask you in a couple of minutes. His thing was be particular, and I thought, what a brilliant way to live, to be particular. Don't just swallow it whole. Be particular. Figure it out for yourself. What do you really want? What are you really going for? There's something very powerful about that for consuming content and also for creating it. What do you think about that?
Um, what do I think about
Being
being the
particular.
voice, being particular?
Mm-hmm.
I think it was something that I wish Guy Kawasaki had said back in 2007.
Mm.
Kawasaki was kind of went into social media infamy when he, on a blog post, said, everyone's an expert, and if you ever doubt that, just go online and basically say, I'm an expert on ... And he basically talked about the importance and the impact that you would have every time you said, well, I'm an expert on,
Mm-hmm.
a subject matter expert, if you will. And when I first read that and first heard that, I said, man, the fallout from this is going to be epic, because it's a bit like, and before I say this next bit, I'm going to be honest. It's going to come across me sound like old man Morris shaking his fist on his front lawn, but hear me out. It's a bit like when 20 somethings are promoted to senior management positions, and 30 somethings are promoted to associate and executive associate executive and executive positions.
Hmm.
To be an expert, you got to earn it. You got to earn it. And I think that would have been a very different kind of game-changing statement if Guy Kawasaki had said something along the lines of, call yourself an expert, but be particular about what you're going to be an expert in.
Mm-hmm.
And because the problem with proclaiming yourself to be an expert, it's going from my own perspectives. When I go on live with Happy Hour from the Tower, I make it very clear I am not the world's greatest player of Destiny. I like to, in fact, what I say is that when people say, describe to me Happy Hour from the Tower, I'm like, it's three knuckleheads who absolutely love the game Destiny. And by using the term knuckleheads, people know, okay, this is not necessarily the podcast for the serious analysis of the game. We might do that, but there's always going to be that little tongue in cheek involved.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, when it comes to the shared desk, though, I am an expert.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm a published author. I have been repeatedly published, and I've written with my wife a 6-book steampunk series. We're working on the 3rd book of a spinoff series, and I've got 4th edition of Podcasting for Dummies coming out, and I've done other Dummies books. I've been affiliated with other Dummies books. So for that, yes, I have that street cred behind me.
Mm-hmm.
But in Guy Kawasaki's world, I could go on ahead and say, I'm an expert in cooking. And next thing you know, I'm starting up a cooking podcast. And the problem with that is I have seen one too many episodes of Chef's Table on Netflix. And when you see those people on Netflix, woofa. I mean, they make, I mean, it's the only time I think I've ever seen food on a TV and I'm ready to eat the TV.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just, and what they do with food is ridiculous. Although I do draw a line for eating bugs. I don't care if you put a little gold foil on it. I'm not eating a freaking bug and paying $150 for it. That's a different conversation. The point I'm getting at is that I would not come on to a podcast and say I'm an expert, but then I'm an expert on okay, here to be a little more topical, to be a little more relevant. I would never come on and say on a podcast I'm an expert in the Constitution because I took a course in the First Amendment at my college. No, I would never say that I was an expert in the Constitution, even though I know I can read the Constitution and I know the difference between a right and the rest of the preamble and yada yada. That doesn't make you an expert.
Right.
It does make you passionate about something, but that doesn't make you an expert. That status has to be earned. And that's where I would say be particular is essential. If you're going to pass yourself off as a voice of authority, because when you launch a podcast, as I've said in the book, when you launch a podcast, to some extent, you are saying, I am a voice of authority.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, what are you, and you better be particular about it. Because if you're trying to pass yourself off as an expert in something and you're not, that's going to backfire on you in the worst possible way. So that's just food for thought.
Mm-hmm. And it's a welcome repast, quite frankly. But so in many ways, because of how long you've been doing this, and sort of you've gone wide and deep in podcasting. So I'm gonna this might sound like a weird question, but how do you feel about being the voice of this medium in many ways? What is your thought on that?
One, how did I get there? It is humbling. It is humbling. I still remember, and I have photographs of my very first rig. I paid $400 for the audio card, the microphone, the mixer board, the cables, the headphones. I bought it piecemeal and I spent $400 and I was like, wow, that was a lot of money to spend. I have 2 microphones in my studio right now that are more than that. Just the microphones.
Right.
But I look at how podcasting changed my life. I look at how podcasting gave me this voice, gave me a direction. And it is very humbling. And when I do get the occasional, because it has happened to me before, what do you know about podcasting? What do you know about podcasting? I look at the person and I go, wow, I don't know how it feels to be that ignorant, but that's okay. That's okay. I'll roll with you. High road. I always say, take the high road. The view's better from there.
Absolutely.
But when people come to me for advice or equipment recommendations or things like that, I always have to cross my fingers and go, please God, tell me I'm doing this right. Tell me I'm recommending the right something for somebody. But I also have said before, one size again doesn't fit all.
Right.
You might have one person that would thrive with an MXL 990, getting the Overcast bundle and just that's their mic setup, or maybe they need to be portable. Okay, then maybe they need to get an H4n. and they'll just do everything portable. Maybe streaming is not for them, or maybe they really should think about streaming. And the more I can find out about what somebody wants to do with their podcast, or what they envision their podcast being, I can be there to point them in the right direction. But I also being considered one of the pioneers, being one of the voices of podcasting, I also tend to try to keep my feet on the ground, because it's I can at least look back and say, yeah, I did these things, and I tested the boundaries, and I pushed those boundaries, and I did what I could to make this process easier for people. And then I look back and I see people taking credit for something that they didn't do, and I'm like, all right, that's on you. It's sometimes it can be a hard walk. It can be a hard walk. But I always look at it as I have enjoyed this journey, and I will continue to enjoy this journey. And I will never forget how it started, how rough it was when I started, and I just look forward to where I'm going next.
That's beautiful. I love it. And I adore you. And this brings me to my penultimate question.
Okay.
You said, where I'm going. Where is podcasting going? Where do you think it's going, and what do you think are the possibilities for podcasting moving forward?
Yeah. I've been saying it a lot, but I've been really seeing streaming as, that's the next logical step.
Mm-hmm.
And the current model that I've been playing around with that has worked best for me is, and to understand why I think this is working so well, and I think it is such a huge step forward, was that I have to reference, there was a piece of it was a software, and I'm not going to mention my name because they're still running, and I know that other people have gotten them to work before, but I could never get their software to work. I could never get it. And the gimmick behind their software was that you could do live podcast recordings.
Mm-hmm.
You could podcast live, and through their site, you would hear the audio, and you could interact with chat, and you could call in if you wanted to call in. It was basically that sort of thing. I could never get it to work. And this was back in 2007, 2008. And live podcasting was supposed to be the next big step.
Mm-hmm.
Well, fast forward, now we've got Twitch, and we've got Facebook Gaming, and we've got Facebook Live, and we've got YouTube Live, and you look at their services, you look at those streaming services, and you look at what you're doing with that podcast, and it really can be exactly what this software promised back in 2007. But now you've got Discord involved. And you can bring people into your chat, and you can have them ask questions of guests. You can have them chit chat with guests if you want. They can become part of the show if they want. Then you've got the chat itself. You've got people dropping questions in chat, and they go on ahead and they talk in chat. And all this stuff adds to the excitement. When I first introduced the idea of streaming the shared desk, Pip, my wife, my partner in crime, she was totally against it. She was just like, I don't know, T. I don't know if that's going to work. And I said, let's just try it out and let's see what happens. And within 10 minutes of her first stream with me, she was all in. She was all in. And we immediately found a groove. She started seeing people coming into chat and talking and asking questions, and and seeing that interaction. And this was something that people really wanted. They wanted to have that live interaction with the podcaster. And now you almost have two flavors of podcasts. You can either watch the live show, and then if you want, you could also do like extra content at the end where you just hang out. You can go off on any tangent you feel like, and then you export all that. You take the audio, you chop off that last bit that has nothing to do with the meat and potatoes of the show. You refine it, and now you have the audio version. So now you have the polished audio version of the show, which goes live on the podcast feed. But then with streaming, you can actually bring in a live aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of doing like special live recordings, every recording is live, and that's a pretty exciting place to be. And that's where I see it going. I see more interaction with podcasting. I see more people listening to podcasts now that Spotify has joined in. And that's the other thing too. I think right now, being a content creator is not only challenging because of all the saturation, but it's also going to be a challenge because there's going to be a demand for new content because, as you said earlier, production companies for television, for film and all that, they're having a tough go. I mean, they released Tenet. in the theaters, and this is a Christopher Nolan film.
Right.
And this was super hyped up, and it's made 12 million. That's it. I mean, yes, theaters are suffering, but it's because people don't want to risk their lives to go to watch a movie. Makes perfect sense. Right now, being a drive-in is probably one of the best things you could do.
Right.
And while I get it, directors want stuff to be seen on the big screen. I totally get that. But what was it, apart from the Dune trailer, that everybody was losing their minds about online? It was when the cast of The Princess Bride, at the time of this recording, got online and they did a live reading of the script as a Zoom meeting. People were losing their minds because this is going to be the way some people are going to start creating content.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd be the first one to say, I'm no competition for the Princess Bride live reading. I mean, come on. But I can say, if you want to catch content, yes, I create it. I create it on a regular basis. And people are going to be in demand for podcasting. People are going to be in demand for streaming media, because if people cannot get onto a set and make a movie or make a TV show, then it's going to be hard to get content out.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to give massive props, since we're talking about getting content out. I got to give massive props to Amazon, because they, again, at the time of this recording, The Boys season 3 is coming out. Season 2, sorry. Season 2. It is season 2. Sorry. I keep getting ahead of myself. So season 2 of The Boys is coming out. They're also doing a live after show called Inside the Boys. And it's hosted by Aisha Taylor. Aisha Tyler. Sorry. And the thing is, this, usually with the after shows, they're all in studio together. They're all doing, they're all talking about the episode, what they liked, what they didn't like, et cetera, et cetera. What they're doing instead is they're doing a socially distant one, where they do it like a Zoom, but they give some presentation behind it. They've got panels, they've got all this stuff up. But what Amazon did was they basically took backdrops that mimicked the set of where Aisha Tyler is, and they sent them to all the actors and actresses and crew and writers and everything. And they said, just put this backdrop up behind you, put yourself in front of a computer, and we'll take it from there. Wow. And they are. Mm-hmm. And it looks great. And they're adapting. So there is room for new content, but it's going to be harder and harder for people to find the longer this pandemic goes on.
Right.
So yeah, podcasting, that's going to be in demand. And as I tell people, what you heard me say earlier, when you feel like you are podcasting to the void, that nobody's listening, podcast even harder. Podcast with passion. Podcast like you got 50,000 people listening to you. That way, when you do get 50,000 listeners, nothing changes. You're still being true and being honest, and you're still having that same amount of passion that you started when you had 5 people listening.
Absolute truth. I love that you said that, because to me, this idea that you just promoted beautifully, it doesn't matter ultimately who's listening or how many there are listening, because the passion that you have for it seems to be the important thing that carries across. I was talking to my friend Al Petaway many years ago, and I was despondent. Oh, I'm a musician and nobody knows me, and and he said, you know what? Play your music. Play your music. Your audience will find you.
Mhm.
And I went, absolutely. I mean, when you have a Grammy Award winner telling you to play your music because your audience will find you, you listen. But you just said it too, and it's so important. This idea that what is the truth of your heart? What is the passion of your soul?
Yeah.
Do that. And there are other people out there who will have that same passion. Will it be 14,372 people? Probably not. But that doesn't seem to be the important part of this. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's and don't get me wrong. Do not get me wrong. It is hard. And it's one of the reasons why I'm going to continue to petition TwitchCon until they say, okay, we'll let you give this talk. But I really want to do a talk at TwitchCon, or at even a podcast convention, where I say where it's about streaming or podcasting to an audience of 0.
Mm.
Because it is hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's particularly hard when you don't think anybody's listening, or you don't think anybody's reading, or you don't think anybody's watching. It is so hard. And it took me a long time to come to grips with it. And where I have been, where I've had those moments, I have to remind myself of just the little things that made me go, no, it's okay. It's okay. I just gotta keep going, and just remember that my audience will find me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it may not happen overnight. It may not happen straight away, but they will find me. I've been affiliated with 3 Kickstarters in my day.
Mm-hmm.
And 2 of them, one of them fell short. Not, I think I had raised like 85%. So, that's, for falling short, it wasn't bad.
Mm-hmm.
The other 2, raging successes. So I know that the audience is there,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been there before, and it's just a matter of, I'll stop podcasting when I stop enjoying it. And that, I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Right.
Not
Right.
at all.
Yeah, and that goes right back to what you said about passion. If you're passionate about it, you want to keep talking about it. You want to keep exploring different aspects and facets of it. That's why we do what we do. Everybody started with no audience. No matter how
Mhm.
famous you are, there was a point at which there were 0 people listening, and
Right.
it grows from there. Every day there you might find somebody new, or somebody new might find you, and that's how we do it, and that's how we
Right.
build a community. I mean, that you mentioned community early on, and that's such an important aspect of this whole idea, is that to me, podcasting feels, even if you're not asking for people to send you questions, it is a form of conversation. It is a form of being involved with your audience because of the feedback you get after the fact. But in streaming, it seems like it can be live and right there, which brings a whole other dimension to the podcast.
And that's been one of the other big charms of podcasting versus other forms of media, with the exception of streaming, because streaming, like you just said, streaming is an instantaneous thing. But with podcasting, there's an intimacy that I think that isn't there in terrestrial radio, in mainstream broadcasting, where people feel like it's closer to going back to the analogy with FDR, the fireside chat,
Mm-hmm.
where people could, people write emails to us. People write, people send voicemails to us. There are all different ways that podcasters make themselves accessible.
Mm-hmm.
I think the hardest person that I think I've ever found accessible, that I find to be accessible, makes sense though. It's David Tennant, and he actually just started podcasting himself. It says, I think it's called David Tennant Does a Podcast. and he's had some really good people on, and I thought, and I looked at some of his guests and I thought, and now I just got to figure out, okay, I need to write a proposal letter, send it off to him, and see. The thing is, I actually have to physically mail something to him, and I'm like, wow. A weird part of me kind of digs that, because and it's intuitive on his part. If you are willing to make that effort, it's like research. If you're willing to make that effort, then he knows you're serious.
Right.
But that's the beautiful thing about all these different podcasts that are out there, is that the hosts, if they're not, and that's the other thing I would say too, is that if you're not making yourself accessible as a host, you're doing it wrong.
Mm.
There have been some people that I contacted for the Podcasting for Dummies 4th edition. I wanted to get, I wanted to use their artwork, or I wanted to get their comment on something. I emailed them and I get nothing in return, crickets. And I'm like, this is not the way you want to do a podcast.
Right.
You want to make yourself accessible. You want to make yourself, because that's how things like this happen. You and me reconnecting, getting together, talking on a podcast, or other opportunities. They come with you making a connection with your audience. Now, it's not always going to be gumdrops and unicorns. It's not. You're going to have people that will tell you flat out how much they don't like your show, and that's on them. That's not on you. That's on them. But making yourself accessible, that intimacy, is what I think is something else that separates podcasting from different, and the community, they gravitate to that, because then they become an active part of the show.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the appeals of, people say that, well, that's a really big appeal of streaming. Yeah, but podcasting was doing it years before streaming. So and it goes back to the fact that you're almost famous. You're not famous, but you're almost famous. And that just makes you a little more accessible.
That's right. Well, but also, we're having a conversation that if someone wants to listen to it, they're not in a big arena. They're, again, they might be working in their garden and they have their headphones on or whatever, and their ear pods are on, or however we call it nowadays. Crazy kids are calling it all these different things. But if you want to listen to two people talking about something that is really, really cool, and it could be podcasting, it could be a Broadway musical, it could be whatever I currently, just so you know, T, I now have 3 podcasts, because one was not enough and neither was 2, and now I have 3.
Yeah.
And that happens. Once you start down this path, you realize that there is so much to explore in this one medium.
Yeah, it's too funny that you told me that now, because I could have given you a huge chunk of ink. So on the 5th edition, I might be coming back to you on this. But I remember a buddy of mine was actually one of the co-hosts of Happy Hour, Nick Kelly. He was saying, so what had happened was, the whole story is that my wife and I were on a panel called Collaborating Couples, and the local writers group wanted us to talk, because Nick collaborates with his wife Stacia, I collaborate with Pip, so they had us all come in. I walk in with 2 beautiful studio prep microphones and my H4n, and I said, I wanted to record this for a podcast. Are you guys okay with that? And Stacia and Nick looked at each other, and then Nick looked at me and said, we don't know what that is, but sure, go ahead. And this is like 2012. So it wasn't like it was like early on. This was like 2012, 2013. And we set up the mics. We did the test, hit record, and we did the podcast. I then sent an email to Nick saying, "Hey, you're live, by the way." And he was like, "Oh my God, this is so cool." And I was like, "Well, you guys are local. You want to come in and like do one in studio?" So they came to the studio and we recorded another shared. So we did it for the shared desk. We did the second one as a shared desk where we talked with Nick and Stacia again, because I think they just had a book come out. So we talked in studio.
Mm-hmm.
So then a month goes by and Nick goes, "T, I think I want to do a podcast. I think I want to do a podcast. I want it to be my family." And I went, "Okay, Nick, before you go down this road," because by this time they had come over, we had really bonded, we were all friends. I said, "Nick, before you go down this road, I'm saying this to you as a friend. Are you sure?" and Nick was like, "You're being pretty melodramatic." I was like, No, I'm being honest. Are you sure?" Because there's no such thing as starting a podcast. I started Happy Hour from the Tower right after I started working on the third edition of Podcasting for Dummies, and my wife thought I was nuts.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about it, I have currently active, I have Shared Desk, Happy Hour from the Tower, and Podcasting for Dummies. And then at one point, we do have to return to Tales from the Archives because we did promise a few more short stories. But when authors weren't getting us their short stories in time, we were like, okay, well then we're just going to let this hang out there until we finally say this is really the last episode.
Mm-hmm.
So that one's like kind of on hiatus. Those are 4 podcasts right there.
Right.
Nick said, "Don't worry, T, I can keep it just one."
So,
So he launches the Geek Wolfpack podcast. Then he agrees to be on Happy Hour from the Tower with me. Then we start recording our sessions for Dungeons and Dragons, and based on the idiocy of the stuff that we were doing, we called it ADHD D&D. But then we got in a new guy on our dungeon crawl, who just adds something special. So he was like, "Okay, so Nick said, I'm gonna skip ahead in ADHD D&D and just and start documenting the stuff that we're doing with our new guy." But then he had all those hours of content from the original ADHD D&D, so he did a spin-off of another podcast called ADHD D&D Classic. So this is 1, 2, 3, and counting Happy Hour, 4 podcasts he's affiliated with within a 5-year span.
wow.
And when he launched ADHD D&D Classic, he said, "T warned me." He warned me. So yeah, there's no such thing as starting a podcast, because you got others that are just waiting to fire off.
Absolutely. I've got this one. I've got the Under One Sky podcast, which is all about environmental issues and how we can take action on that.
Uh-huh.
And then I've got Two Women of a Certain Age that I'm doing with my bandmate, and we're going to be talking about music and movies and whatever else.
Oh, that's cool.
Well, please. Yeah, we're excited about that too. And so yeah, it's once you start spinning these tales and once you start having these conversations, there's no end to it, and you just get inspired to do more. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about this medium, is that it is limitless. And I love that the barrier to entry is almost non-existent. If you want to do it on your phone, you can.
And even worse is that it's like a weird addiction. Not just recording and launching podcasts, but also finding ways of getting onto other people's podcasts. Because when you said, "Oh yeah, I do this other podcast on environmental issues," I'm like, "Isolde, I've been driving green since 2012, right?"
Yeah. Yay!
I've been driving green since 2012. If you ever want to talk about electric vehicles, am I an expert? No. Am I a knucklehead who drives a Leaf and a Volt? Heck yeah. And I could tell some stories about that. Oh, can I tell some stories about that?
I would love it.
So yeah, it is a weird addiction. That's the only way I can describe it. And the only way it's bad for you is that it becomes a bad addiction when you're like, they're like, "Hey, let's go out and do XYZ. Let's do this." I can't. I got to edit a podcast.
Right. Oh, I forgot to eat yesterday because I was editing a podcast.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So, okay, I lied when I said I had one more question because I did want to keep this under our record of 3.5 hours, but I'm not
Please,
sure we will.
please. I'm just gonna
So,
let it go. Let it go,
right.
baby. Let it go.
So let's talk about this real quickly. Ha ha ha, you and me talking about something quickly. Promotion. How do you tell people about your podcast about Matryoshka dolls? How do you tell how instead of the other way the audience finds you, how do you reach out to
Mhm.
people? What's the best way to tell them about the cool new thing you're doing?
Right. Well, I mean, bottom line, there's this thing called social media. You got to get the word out. You got to get the word out that you're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be shy about telling people about your podcast. You can't be shy about if it's a relevant topic um, to a conversation, bringing it up and saying, I talked about this on the podcast last week. And if some people think that's shamelessly plugging, at the same time, you got to go, yeah, but it's promotion. It's only really it only becomes spam when in the middle of conversations on social media you suddenly blurt out, I'm doing a podcast. um I tend to be very I tend to be very particular, especially when it comes to promotion, about how and where I let people know that I have a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And even when you put something on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, even when you do that, there are people that still go, wait, you've got a podcast? So they'll still miss it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I what there are a couple ways, a couple ways that I promote a podcast. One way is I go on ahead and I create promos for my podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
Promos are anywhere from a minute to a minute and a half, little and when you get a minute and a half, you're kind of pushing it. But if you're clever enough in your promotion, you can actually go a little longer. But that's the sweet spot. It's a minute to a minute and a half, and it's basically about your podcast. And you're basically creating a commercial for what your show is all about. And if you
Mm-hmm.
can incorporate clips from your show, that's even better if you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
I've done that before with Happy Hour. I've scripted stuff before where we're kind of poking fun at ourselves. With the shared desk, there was some back and forth banter with my wife. That worked. There's all different ways of promoting a podcast. The trick is making sure that it's quick. You mention the website where people can find you, and also you need to make sure, because I've heard a lot of promos in my day, and it's amazing how many people go. I've sent the promo back to the person. I go, you haven't put a website or where people can subscribe. You know that, right? And some people have actually re-recorded the promo. Other people have said, well, they'll figure it out. I'm like, no, you don't do that. You got to tell people where they can find you. So, so that's one way. And then I basically go to, I will make an announcement on Twitch, on Twitter, and on Facebook, pretty much anywhere I'm on socially. And I'll go, I have promos. If you want to use a promo for your podcast or your stream, let me know. I would love to send it to you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't send them without invitation.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that's also spamming. You don't want to just pick people at random and go, oh, you're a writing podcast. Here's my promo for the shared desk. Enjoy. That could come across as a no bueno. The other way I promote my podcast is by creating show art and putting it on Facebook, putting it on Twitter, putting it on Instagram, and letting people know that if there's a special guest on, yes. If there's something going on, yes. I like to keep people in the know on what we're doing that way.
Mm-hmm.
And since I'm doing it in the way where I've got a stream going and I've got a podcast, I will basically do a post about the stream being live, and then when the podcast is available, that's when I go, podcast is now available. What I would love to do is find out how you do your promos, because I love the idea of having the show art and then having that sound wave going as you play a clip from the show. I've got podcast envy over that. I want to know how you do that so that I can start doing that myself, because that's a really cool touch. That's a very
Oh,
cool touch.
that's awesome. Yeah, it's super easy. I know that it I'd love to say that it's all mysterious and everything, but it's not. It's super easy and it's Headliner app and that's what you
Headliner.
do. Yep. And I can, you know what? I need to write a blog post about how to do that because it's actually really simple. Come up with your show art and 1080 by 1080, come up with your clip, and then you upload the show art, you upload the clip, and then it generates the those sound waves for you,
Yeah.
and then you export the whole thing. It comes out as an MP4, and there you go. It's super easy.
I mean, that's to me that's awesome, because it's just a quick, simple, and easy way, and it's interactive too. And one of the things that I've noticed, um, which isn't anything new in social media, if you have video or audio or otherwise, people tend to gravitate towards that.
Hmm.
And it's just a nice little touch. It's a nice little touch, but that's how I let people know. You only you and the trick about good promotion versus spamming promotion is that if it's not welcome, or or it's unwarranted, then you start to turn people off. You start to turn people off if all you're doing is talking about your latest show or something like that. But if you're having a conversation with people and they start talking about, let's say somebody starts talking about um, um, writing, about writing, and we go into writing with a collaborative audience or something along those lines. Well, that's when you can point out the shared desk, because we talk about collaboration.
Hmm.
If you're having a conversation online and someone talks about, say, um, they're doing a research paper on the early days of the space race, well, then you can also point to them Time Magazine's Countdown, which was a limited edition, a limited series
Hmm.
that was that was about the early days of the space race and how close some accidents came. Little things like that. I mean, you can go if it's relevant, promote it. But when it comes when it comes in the middle of conversations that have nothing to do with your podcast,
Hmm.
that's when you kind of cross the line.
Right.
But you can't be shy about it either. You can't be shy about it either. If you podcast it, they will not come. You have to let people know that
Sure.
you've got a podcast in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I think is really great to remember is that the people you are friends with on social are friends with you in part because they want you to know what's up with them, but they also want to know what's up with you. And if this is what you're excited about, then talking about it is a good thing. You know, that's I'm going to be trumpeting the fact that you and I got a chance to catch up and talk again all over my social media because in
Right.
part, you know, because A, I think you're fabulous, but also because it is a relevant conversation. Podcasting and social media are they're huge parts of a lot of people's lives. But you know what's interesting, and this is something I'd like to see. I knew that I wasn't going to be done asking you questions. I'd love to get your take on this.
Right.
There's a psychology at play here. When you're hanging out with a lot of like-minded people, you start thinking that everyone is like you. In other words, if you're hanging out with a lot of content creators, you start thinking that everybody is a content creator, but that is just not true. You know, there are people who are content creators, and there are a huge amount of the population that don't create content.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that? How do you feel about that idea of the psychology at work there that it becomes this insular we are all one, but we're not.
Well, again, it kind of harkens back to those early days of of podcasting. Um, when we started doing this, people were you could say they were intimidated. You could say that they were unimpressed. You could say they weren't interested. But there were these there was this podcasting community. It's like, we're going to make content, and this was before making content was, content creation was the thing, and content creation was cool. And you're making all this really cool stuff, and you're you're kind of you're right. It was very insular, but then it started creeping. People started doing newspaper reports on it. They started going, "What's a podcast?" Books started getting published. Then people started going, "Oh, so it's kind of accessible." Now we're at a point where everybody's making content, and where I find it being a little insular or being a little ridiculous is how some platforms are trying to make their platform the one-stop shop.
Mm.
Case in point, Facebook. Facebook owns Instagram. Instagram just introduced something called Reels,
Mm-hmm.
and now I'm being told, "Oh, you should watch this reel. You should watch this reel." So I was like, "Okay," And after about 3 weeks of hearing about Reels, I'm like, "You know what? Fine. I'm gonna hit Reel, and I'm gonna see what this reel is all about." I tap it. What is it? It's somebody's TikTok video repurposed on Instagram, and I'm like, "Really?"
Hmm.
And there's nothing new. There's nothing new there. It's like, okay, so now you're telling me that Reel is just another place that someone can throw their TikTok video on. And while everybody's kind of losing their minds right now about TikTok, let's be painfully honest. Those 10 videos that you see on TikTok that are super cute, super funny, super hilarious, that's 10 out of the millions of dire videos that people are putting on TikTok. Not every TikTok video is going to be that stand-up comedian who lip syncs to Trump. They're not.
Mm-hmm.
And that is where I think people are. Right now, we have so many different ways of creating content. Nobody knows where to put it. And Facebook wants to be that one-stop shop. And I'm like, well, just because you have a one-stop shop doesn't necessarily mean that's where you should be consuming your content.
Mm-hmm.
People need to, and we said this in, my wife and I said this in Social Media for Writers. These are all the platforms that we've written about, but let's be honest. You don't have to be on all these platforms. You can be on some, you don't have to be on all of them. I tried Pinterest. I've tried making Pinterest work. I can't. Tumblr, it's a place where I put my Instagram stuff. Let's see. And Facebook, I at one time put a lot of stuff on Facebook, and then I saw on Netflix this documentary called The Great Hack, and I have been feeling myself slowly pulling away from Facebook, and some of their policies I have not liked at all, and the fact that Zuckerberg basically was so cavalier about private data on Facebook. But then when a reporter asked him, "Oh, so you had a private dinner with the president? What did you have to say to him?" And they were like, "Well, I think you should respect the privacy there." I'm like, "Oh, really? Oh, okay. So there are two rules at play here. Gotcha. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it." To me, you will find your audience and then focus on that platform.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tell people that, anybody can create content. Does that mean everybody creates good content? Absolutely not. But if you're having, like I said, going back to enjoying it, if you are having a good time creating content, then that's all you need. That's where you move forward. And then if you promote it, you let people know that you're doing something. It's awesome. And if you succeed at it, even better. But is there a saturation of content creators? Yes. Everybody can be a content creator, but then what I'm seeing is people saying, "I can be a content creator too." They hop on and they suddenly realize, "Hey, wait a minute. This is more than just me coming on and playing a video game. I have to talk to people. I have to interact. I don't think I like this," and then they burn out.
Right.
Very quickly, I might add. And then but there's no magic bullet of success. Case in point, there's a streamer I just started following. He streams 1 day a week. And he has 1.3 million follows.
Wow.
I don't know. I don't know what his partner. But well, and he's got to have. If he's got 1.6 million followers, he is currently making money off of Twitch, because on Twitch, some of those followers graduate up to subscribers, and he has enough subs that he is partnered. To give you an idea of how, and what does he do? He's a Maori guy in New Zealand, and he does woodworking.
Wow.
And he has had such an impact that just last week, the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, went by his stream, hopped on, and said hi.
Huh.
In person.
Wow.
And they were still social distancing, but they were in person. They had a little chit chat live on his stream. And if you were to say, well, what was the magic bullet? I could tell you right now, I don't know. Apart from the fact that he loves what he's doing. And I've seen some of the sculptures that he's created. Oh my God, they're gorgeous. Wow. And they're all, it's some of it is Maori imagery. Some of it is just stuff that's coming out of his head. And it's amazing. But that's the thing. Does he defy the rules? Oh yeah, he definitely defies the rules. He streams once a week, and he's got 1.3 million follows. And I'm just like, that's nuts. But do I respect it? Oh yeah, I really respect it. And part of what makes him a good content creator is what he does, and the drive and the love of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, whenever somebody says, "Oh yeah, I'll do some streaming because streaming's easy," I'm like, "You've never streamed before." Never streamed before. And it's the same thing with podcasting. I've seen so many people that go, "We'll do a podcast. It'll be easy." I'll be like, "Look, I've written this book 3 times over, coming up on 4 times. Trust me, it is not easy. It is not easy." So yeah, there are people that will either there, and that's going to be that's sort of the growing pain right now that podcasting and streaming are both going through. Everybody thinks they can create content, and the hard truth, the inconvenient truth is, not everybody can on a consistent basis.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start getting consistency, and you start getting interactivity, and you start getting into, okay, we did this, what's next? That's when people start going, wow, this is hard. And suddenly people aren't podcasting anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. It takes a commitment for sure. And yet, my goodness, is it lovely to do? You know, just as I'm 350 episodes in, which obviously is not anywhere near as much as you, but still, I have only more ideas. And I think that's when you know a platform is right for you, is when you're
Mm-hmm.
in it and you've been in it, and the only thing you have is more ideas and more things you want to try.
And that's the thing is that you know, there is how do I put this? When you know, when all you can think about is, well, when do I get on the mics again? When do I get on the mics again? Who's the next person I talk to? What's the next episode? That's when you know you've hit your stride.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you know that this is something that you love to do. And there are, you know, it's, when I was, again, going back to the evolution of it, to the whole journey, I can remember the time when I said I'd do a podcast, and people were like, "Oh, what's a podcast?"
Mm-hmm.
Now it's, yeah, I have a podcast, and they look at me and they go, "You too?" and then people ask me, "Okay, so and instead of, well, what's a podcast? Now it's, what makes your podcast so special?"
Right.
And you know, and all my stuff is, I can say each of my podcasts have some kind of interesting angle to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't sell them short. You know, I say, look, I do a podcast where you know, it's me and my wife, and we talk about collaboration. We talk about writing, because we're both writers. With Podcasting for Dummies, it's endorsed by Wiley, and it is the official podcast for dummies, the Podcasting for Dummies podcast that goes with the book. And then we've got, and then we've got a happy hour from the tower where I go, yeah, it's three guys who really love Destiny, and it's not, you know, and note, I don't say, you know, we're three top tier you know, trials participants and PvP experts, and no, we're three guys who really like Destiny,
Mm-hmm.
and we just want to talk about it. And so, and this, you know, that's where where we are now. The market, both podcasting and content creation, is absolutely wall to wall with people, but you're going to see that number start to fall. And it's because there are going to be people who think, oh, that's easy, but then they try it and they go, well, maybe it's not as easy as I thought. But then for all those 5 people who try and pod fade after episode 3, you've got that one person that's like you and me, who are going to be like, okay, when's the next episode?
Right.
What can I do next? And then you start actively looking for things to podcast, and that's when you know, yeah, I'm in this whole, you know, 100%.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I love that you said that. And there's, you know, here's the problem, T. I'm having a problem. And the problem is that I could ask you another 50, 60 questions and we could be here for that.
I bet you could.
That marathon 24-hour podcast episode.
Yeah.
Because you're such a delight and so wonderful to speak with. But I do know that there eventually one of us will have to eat, drink, or go to the bathroom. So, to be fair, I got strong kidneys and I've been hanging on to it for the past half hour, so we're fine. We're good. It's only if I shift and go, oh yeah, okay, right.
It's all that we need to wrap it up.
When you realize, oh, things are changing.
Yeah.
So okay, book comes out. Book is out today. Yay! Where can I find it? And where, more importantly, even can I find you? If I'm listening to this show, where do I find T. Morris and where do I find the 4th edition of Podcasting for Dummies?
The good news is that you can find them all in the same location. You can find them at T. Morris, that's my name, TEMORRIS.com. And when you get there, not only will you see across the top most, if not all, of my social media links, you also find a direct link to my own personal bookshop, where if you order the books from me directly, they come to you signed. Now, if you would rather get your Amazon discount, get a little street cred with Amazon, you know, that sort of thing, you'll be able to find the books on Amazon pretty much anywhere where books are sold. You can find the 4th edition of Podcasting for Dummies today in brick and mortar stores everywhere. You can find it online everywhere. So yeah, but if you want to keep an eye on what I'm up to and what I'm doing, yeah, that's going to be tmorris.com. And hopefully I will be getting back into the swing of things with blogging myself by the time this recording drops. I'm not going to make any promises on that because, again, blogging is always the toughest thing for me to do. But those are all the places where you can find me.
Excellent. Thank you. I appreciate that, because it would be really sad to do this whole episode talking about the 4th edition and not mention where people can actually locate it.
Exactly.
Because there's so much updated and so much new from just 5 years ago that I'm super excited to read what all the cool new stuff is that you put in. And it changes, you know, I'm like, okay, the 5th edition in a couple of years, because I'm sure things will change even further. And I'm so glad that you were there to stay on top of this and then bring it out to the rest of us who learned from you. So thank you for that.
Thank you for picking up the 3rd. It's because of people like you who picked up the 3rd edition that now there's a 4th edition. I mean, that's how book sales work. Even if nonfiction, if enough books sell, they'll go, yeah, let's do this again, and we do, and it's always good. It's always good.
And it's updated, so much is different from between the 2 editions that I think is going to be really helpful to anybody who either is a longtime podcaster like I am, or somebody who wants to start out. That's the whole point of the For Dummies series, is that if you want to start, by gum, you can. once you
Right.
read the book. So there's a lot of power in that, and I'm really grateful that you, such a phenomenal storyteller and writer, are the person, part of a team, true, but the person who's telling this particular story. So I'm really grateful to you for that.
And thank you again for having me on the show so soon.
Oh,
I mean, let's just be honest. We just figured that that 3.5 hours and some change wasn't enough,
right.
so we're back for more. And yeah,
And
everybody's breathing easier now.
that's right. Whew. Well, and it's almost three, and we are now, I think, just over 3 hours. So the marathon session is a go. No,
There you go.
so I want again, T. Thank you so much for being on the show. And I asked that one last question that I always ask, and you might not remember your answer from last time, so that's good actually because it might be a different answer. But if you had an airplane that could skywrite something for the whole world to see, what would you say?
Well, I want to do something. I know I have no recollection of what I said the last time, even though I listened to the interview. Um, the funny thing is that we're kind of prepping our daughter for Bill and Ted Face the Music. So
Ah,
we've been going back and rewatching the original Bill and Ted's, and we just finished Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey,
mm-hmm,
and um, all that's coming to my head right now is be excellent to each other. We need to do more of that. It's been a long, hard road these past few months,
mm-hmm,
and it only seems to be getting rougher. And regardless of what happens in November, it's not going to be throwing up a switch and then everything's going to be back to normal. There's going to
right,
be we have a road ahead,
mm-hmm,
and my that's I guess that'd be all I could say if I had that the skywriting plane. It would have to be a really super effective skywriting plane, but but if I couldn't say be excellent to each other, I would just say I would just say be excellent.
mm,
Be excellent not only to each other but be excellent to you. I think so. I think in this time of COVID, we're some folks are kind of putting a back burner on self-care, and it's talking to a friend, whether it's getting on Talkspace and talking to somebody that you need to talk to, or just going on to a stream of somebody that you trust and saying and not basically saying something so heavy to them that it would throw them off in whatever they were doing, but just being able to just get a sense of community,
mm-hmm.
people you can talk to and find out, hey, how's everybody holding up? How's everybody doing? That I think will make a big difference coming down the pike. So that's what I would say. Just be excellent. Be excellent.
Uh, that's wonderful. I love it. Thank you again, T. I'm so grateful that you were able to join me for this. And go get T. Morris's 4th edition of Podcasting for Dummies, which is out today at tmorris.com or wherever you buy your really super cool, excellent books. I want to thank you for joining me for the show. If you are liking what you're hearing, comment, please let me know what you're thinking. I'd love to hear from you. And I'd love it if you'd review the show. This has been a special bonus episode of the Innovative Mindset Podcast because John Watkiss premieres tomorrow. So this is a bonus. Woohoo! You're getting it a day early and almost 3.5 hours worth. So yay. Until next time, this is Isolde Trachtenberg telling you to remember to listen, learn, laugh, and love a whole lot. Thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Today's episode was produced by Isolde Trachtenberg and is copyright 2020. As always, please remember this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Past performance does not guarantee future results, although we can always hope. Until next time, this is Isolde Trachtenberg, and I send you all of my love.